For the past year and a half, I've been working with antiparasitics that are being repurposed for cancer. This is ivermectin, mebendazole, and fenbendazole. And the reason is because there's a big body of research. There are over 400 published papers on ivermectin in cancer. There are over 240 published papers on mebendazole in cancer. In fact, Johns Hopkins quietly secured a patent in 2021 on mebendazole for treatment in cancer, specifically the most aggressive cancer, which is glioblastoma, brain cancer, extremely aggressive cancer. Johns Hopkins has the patent. They are also running quietly several clinical trials with mebendazole in cancer. There's colon cancer, gastric cancer, and brain cancer, including children with brain cancers as well. So this is not fringe. This is not something that is far out. There's actually real science behind it, patents behind it. And when you search a lot of the AIs, for example, Perplexity AI, and you ask, what are the most promising repurposed drugs for terminally ill cancer patients today? It will give you in its search in the top 3, you will get ivermectin as number 1, mebendazole and fenbendazole. There's other antiparasitics like hydroxychloroquine will be in the top 10. You will have curcumin in the top 10. You will have EGCG, which is from a green tea extract, in the top 10. Resveratrol in the top 10. Metformin, which is a diabetes drug, but also has anti-cancer activity, in the top 10 as well. And what I have found working with these antiparasitics is that there is a benefit to patients in at least 75% of the cases.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Underdogs versus the Establishment. I'm Vandersteel. This afternoon, we're spotlighting 2 warriors from very different backgrounds who share the same mission, standing up to powerful institutions that have abandoned the people they were meant to serve. In our first segment, we're joined by Dr. William Makis, a Canadian physician defying the medical establishment with truth and evidence. And in our second segment, we're going to be turning to North Carolina U.S. Senate candidate Don Brown, a constitutional fighter challenging political corruption head on. 2 underdogs, 1 fight. For years, the public was told to, trust the science, but many of the voices behind that science were carefully curated, politically protected, and shielded from scrutiny. Meanwhile, the researchers and the physicians who dared to question the narrative were silenced, punished, or erased. Dr. William Makis refused to be one of them. He became one of the earliest, most courageous whistleblowers documenting vaccine injuries, myocarditis, sudden deaths, and the shocking rise of what we now know to be called turbo cancers. And on his Substack, where real medical stories replace propaganda, he published eye-opening testimonials of cancer patients experiencing rapid improvement after using repurposed treatments like ivermectin, fenbendazole, mebendazole, and CBD oil. These cases challenge the pharmaceutical orthodoxy, and Dr. Makis has paid a professional price for telling the truth. Joining me now is Dr. William Makis. Dr. Makis, it is a pleasure to have you here this afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. I know you do a lot of interviews and you put out an extraordinary amount of content, so we certainly want to be mindful of your time.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So for the viewers who are new to your work, how did a Canadian nuclear medicine physician become one of the most important voices challenging the official COVID and vaccine narrative?
It's been a long and fascinating story. I ran into corruption in the Canadian healthcare system before the COVID-19 pandemic. I was actually using cutting-edge cancer treatments, targeted radiation treatments before COVID-19. The Canadian government didn't like it. We were treating cancer patients with a very unique treatment that was developed in Europe that the FDA sat on for almost 20 years because they were afraid that it would take money away from the chemo industry. In fact, Scott Adams, who was recently diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer, and he had reached out to President Trump for help. Scott Adams is the famous creator of the Dilbert cartoon. He recently received targeted radiation therapy that I have developed about 10 years ago called Pluvicto. And so, I had been involved in cancer research, cutting edge cancer research for 10 years, was targeted by the Canadian government before the COVID-19 pandemic, was involved in a $13 million lawsuit over the sabotage of my cancer program when the pandemic hit. And so I was really outside the establishment at that point. There were attempts to bribe me. There were attempts to silence me, have me sign non-disclosure agreements, take $500,000 in cash, which I refused. The Canadian government had gone after my medical license. And so when the pandemic hit, I was effectively in a sort of a self-retirement, still fighting, corruption with the Canadian, government, fighting in courts. But I felt I could speak freely. And I really wasn't subjected to the propaganda that all Canadian doctors were subjected to. I wasn't subjected to COVID-19 vaccine mandates. I had looked at, the COVID vaccines. I looked at the technology, which was actually failed cancer technology. A lot of people don't realize that the so-called COVID vaccine, which is not really a vaccine, as we all know, was actually a couple of failed technologies that had failed in cancer patients. Lipid nanoparticles were tried in cancer patients. They tried loading them with chemo, and they didn't work because they went all over the body and they dumped chemo all over the place. So we knew that was a failed tech. mRNA, modified mRNA, had never been used in people, had never worked. We knew that they tried, to work with it in the past, and in tiny little trials, it had never worked before. So when I had heard that COVID vaccines were going to be based on these two failed cancer technologies, I looked at my wife, I laughed, and I said, we're not participating in this nonsense.
Right.
And I couldn't believe that so many healthy people lined up and signed up, to get themselves injected with this stuff, which was completely experimental. And so I really felt I could speak freely. I had no obligations to the health authorities. I didn't have to participate in the propaganda. In fact, I noticed very early on in the pandemic that my colleagues, Canadian doctors who lined up and got themselves vaccinated because they would lose their job if they didn't get at least 2 shots by the end of 2021, they started dying.
Yes.
They started dying suddenly. A bunch of Canadian doctors died as soon as they took their booster shots. And then they started getting aggressive cancers. And I first documented very aggressive cancers in Canadian doctors in the summer of 2022. I notified the Canadian Medical Association. I wrote them several letters, and they called it disinformation, misinformation, Russian propaganda, and they buried it. And they deleted all deceased Canadian doctors from their website, and then they tried to silence me, make sure that no one would ever talk about it.
Incredible story. You prompted something in my memory, which I think one of the first days President Trump was in the Oval Office, he had Larry Ellison standing there talking about cancer vaccines and using mRNA technology. What ran through your head when you heard that?
I honestly laughed when I first saw that because I couldn't believe the hubris of these 3 tech bros that were, in President Trump's office. Now, you'll notice there were no health officials there. And at least if there were, doctors, oncologists, at least we could call them out and say, hey, listen, what you said is nonsense. The mRNA platform is a failed platform. It's a failed technology. It's a failed pharmaceutical. It doesn't work for COVID-19. It hasn't saved a single life in COVID. And now they're trying to use it for cancer. And I know why they're doing it is because it is extremely profitable. The projected cost of these personalized mRNA cancer vaccines is supposed to be about $500,000. And it's not even one injection, that could potentially protect you from cancer. It's a series. It's a dozen injections, and they inject you with Keytruda as well. Now, Keytruda is an established cancer treatment by Merck. And so this is actually a partnership between Moderna and Merck that they're doing, trying to put out this product, this mRNA cancer vaccine, which I looked at their trials. It doesn't work. They claim 10% survival benefit, 20% survival benefit. This stuff doesn't actually work. That's why they have to combine it with an established cancer drug like Keytruda to actually show some kind of benefit and attribute it to the mRNA vaccine. but it's all about money. And so when you have this mRNA vaccine that's going to cost $500,000 for each cancer patient, well, of course, Larry Ellison can then, go to President Trump and say, well, we're going to invest $500 billion and this is going to make billions of dollars and so on. And I know President Trump probably likes big numbers, and that's the only reason they got into the White House in the first place.
Yeah.
But it's absolute nonsense. It's a fraud. The mRNA vaccine platform is a fraud.
I totally agree with you, and I speak to doctors about this all the time. I've spoken to so many people that have digested the research, have looked at the patents before they even supposedly were manufactured, but we know now that they were injecting our military with COVID-19 shots back as early as 2015. And the patents go back, as you probably know, to the Wellcome Trust and the Rothschilds and Bill and Melinda Gates early on, long before they discovered coronavirus, or the SARS-CoV-2, which was patented with a whole host of other disgusting things put in there. I'm already seeing some of the folks come in YouTube right here. This particular individual says, this is dumb. Delivering mRNA is a really effective method for gene expression. We already do it with siRNAs. Do you have a comment for siRNAs, Dr. Makis?
No, actually, I'm not that familiar with siRNAs myself. When I looked into what the plans were with mRNA technology, I see the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines as a gateway to other gene therapies, other genetic modifications, and we already are seeing the next generation of mRNA vaccines that are being rolled out, have been rolled out in Japan already, and these are the self-amplifying vaccines.
Yes,
exactly, the SA.
That could have been what they meant to write in the chat, by the way. So that's why I asked you, because I was familiar with the SA.
But the problem with the self-amplifying mRNA vaccines is that they are just nightmare fuel. They are really the COVID mRNA vaccines on steroids. They don't just have the potential to shed, as we saw with COVID-19 vaccines. And again, shedding is a real phenomenon. Pfizer admitted this in their trials. They warned about it. They warned their safety officers about it, that if pregnant women were exposed to shedding through inhalation or skin contact, to notify Pfizer safety officers. So, we still get hit with the conspiracy theory accusations that there's no such thing as shedding and it doesn't exist, when Pfizer actually told us that their product sheds. But the danger with these self-amplifying mRNA vaccines is that when they shed, you don't just get exposed to a limited quantity of lipid nanoparticles and mRNA. You get exposed to an mRNA that, if you take it in, can actually amplify itself, create more of itself. So you become now the mRNA vaccine factory. And in fact, you now become vaccinated because now your body's producing all of this mRNA, and there's no off switch on the production of the amount of mRNA. So with the original vaccines, you're producing an unlimited amount of spike protein. If you get exposed by shedding, you get exposed to a little bit of spike protein. And we've had women report miscarriages because of shedding. We've had women report very unusual bleeding. And there is a danger. I've discussed this with Kevin McKernan. There is a potential danger that some people may actually develop cancer through the shedding process, having been exposed even to a small amount of the original COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, where they may have gotten these plasmids. If there is an integration event, they may actually get cancer. But with these self-amplifying things, everyone who's exposed through shedding could potentially have all the side effects as if you were injected in the first place.
Yeah, and that is of grave concern. I travel a lot in those flying incubation tubes all over the country. So I've had the vaccine headaches, or I call them bioweapon headaches, because I refuse to call it a vaccine. To me, it's truly the bioweapon that was released on the planet in 5.5 billion arms that took the shot. Absolutely shocking what happened. So for me, I know when the moment that was my breaking point, when I realized the medical establishment was suppressing evidence rather than engaging in honest scientific inquiry. It happened on March 20th of 2020, when President Trump was doing a coronavirus press conference. And he talked about getting a letter from a New York doctor, a good friend of mine, and I'm sure you probably knew him too. He's the late Dr. Vladimir Zelenko wrote a letter to the president. And President Trump read the letter aloud, talking about the efficacy and the prophylaxis and treatment of coronavirus with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. And President Trump said he had a very good feeling about hydroxychloroquine at the time, only to have Dr. Fauci practically bum rush him off the podium to talk about needing to do double-blinded placebo-controlled studies on this. When I then was myself getting over COVID that I had gotten from the CPAC earlier that year in February, I was lying in bed in March, just recovering from 10 days of an unreal bioweapon injection of the airborne. They injected it through the air conditioning system, I believe, according to Dr. Sasha Latipova. That's how they distribute it. I quickly searched and I saw that NIH had studied coronaviruses using hydroxychloroquine in early 2000s, and they knew it was efficacious in prevention and treatment of coronavirus. And so Fauci lied right there on the stand, and I realized, my God, they're covering up something very big, and it's got to be about money. And what else? What was your breaking point?
Well, I can tell you the ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine were the original repurposed drugs. They were the biggest repurposed drugs during the COVID-19 pandemic. And when I talk about repurposed drugs, what I mean is drugs that were designed for one purpose, and then were discovered to have efficacy for a completely different purpose. And I use this now in cancer with these antiparasitics, ivermectin, fenbendazole, mebendazole, that were discovered to have antiparasitic activity, and then scientists found out that they also have anti-cancer activity and are now using them for cancer. With the pandemic, we knew, certainly Fauci knew, but a lot of doctors and scientists knew that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine worked for the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Certainly Fauci knew about it years before the pandemic even started. And so when President Trump came out and actually backed hydroxychloroquine, we saw, and I saw this with my own eyes, we saw a rush by the medical establishment, by the scientific paper establishment, by the media, a rush to demonize ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, but demonize them in such a way that we've never seen before. We saw scientific papers like Nature and New England Journal of Medicine put their reputations on the line and put out fraudulent papers where these repurposed drugs were attacked. They were called damaging and dangerous. Now, these are repurposed drugs that have been used safely for decades. Hydroxychloroquine has been used safely for 7 decades. There were never any issues with hydroxychloroquine. And suddenly we have papers saying that, oh, these are dangerous, these are causing heart attacks, these are causing deaths. And a lot of these papers ended up being retracted. I mean, there's a scandal called Lancet Gate, where a paper claiming that hydroxychloroquine was killing people was pushed through and then retracted a week later because the authors would refuse to provide the data, to substantiate their allegations. And yet that fraudulent paper, initially published in Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine, was used as a justification to shut down hydroxychloroquine trials for SARS-CoV-2 all over the world. So patients lost access to hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment. And when I saw the attacks on ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and I knew it wasn't just because President Trump was onto something, or that because he's the one who put it out publicly, I knew there was something really, really rotten. And it became very clear why they did it, why they attacked ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine so viciously. It was because they needed to roll out these genetic injections, these COVID-19 vaccines under emergency authorization, which they would have never gotten because there were treatments available for SARS-CoV-2, and a couple of these treatments were ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. So the COVID vaccines would have never happened. They would have never been able to roll them out, make hundreds of billions of dollars. Everyone who got bribed to push these things, every doctor, every public healthcare official, every politician, all of those bribes would have never happened. That was the reason why they suppressed it so much. That was the reason why there was that tweet from the FDA, "You're not a horse, you're not a cow, don't take ivermectin," which was unbelievable in terms of corruption. The FDA completely lost, any credibility it may have had at that point, claiming that ivermectin was a veterinary drug when there had been 4 billion doses given to humans of a human version of ivermectin around the world. 5 decades of safety established, a Nobel Prize.
Thank you.
Drug won in 2015. And it was on the WHO's most important medicines list along with penicillin.
Right.
And
remdesivir was removed from the WHO after the trials for Ebola. They said never again.
Yeah. I mean, it was just unbelievable to watch it in real time.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw the destruction of medical ethics in real time.
Would you say that being a licensed doctor is more of a license to kill than it is actually something to make sure you're ethical at this point?
It's a license to kill. It's a license to be a big pharma sales rep, or as I like to say, big pharma prostitute, because it really, if you went along with all the establishment narratives during the COVID-19 pandemic, you had to abandon all of your medical ethics.
Yeah.
And you really had to sell your soul, sell your MD. If you have a PhD, you had to sell your PhD. Because these narratives were so corrupt, so abusive. This abandonment of informed consent. I mean, an informed consent was completely abandoned when these injections were rolled out. No one received informed consent. No one was told, hey, listen, there's this VAERS, vaccine adverse reporting system. We are seeing reports of myocarditis. We are seeing reports of blood clots. We're seeing reports of sudden death. Hey, if you're going to take these COVID vaccines, just be aware that these things can cause blood clots. These things can cause,
Right.
myocarditis, heart attacks, damage, heart damage, strokes. And that was in the first months of the rollout. We knew that those things were happening by the time most healthy people were actually eligible for these injections, whether it was, April, May, or June of 2021. No one received informed consent. And that was one of the cornerstones of medical ethics, was informed consent, and it completely disappeared.
And, when you think about it, when you look at all the advertising that was on television for pharmaceuticals over the past, 10, 20 years, they started advertising big pharma on TV. They always have that guy's voice speaking at 3x speed, giving you a list of all the adverse events that you might be running into should you decide to try whatever the drug is. Never once did they have that on the commercials. It was an EUA drug, an emergency use authorized drug. The package insert was blank, intentionally so. Yeah. And people like Doc Pete Chambers, who was the 39-year flight surgeon, Green Beret, National Guard battalion commander on the border, protecting our border to the best he could under the circumstances with the Biden regime at that time, was giving informed consent, and they removed him from duty. So it was absolutely extraordinary what we watched. You've seen the transition, as you said, you started to see elevations in myocarditis. The Department of Medical Epidemiological Database showed 1,100% increase in all-cause mortality. That information got out. That was even given to President Trump in February of 2022. I know because I gave it to his attorney personally, who asked for it, and gave it to him the next day. He was briefed again by General Flynn in December of 2022. So he has known about the adverse events of Operation Warp Speed. We've seen a significant rise, and you've used the term turbo cancer. So for people who aren't familiar, what defines these turbo cancers, and why are they appearing with such speed and ferocity?
Turbo cancer is very interesting. The origin of the term, it was actually coined by a Swedish pathologist, Dr. Uwe Kruger, in 2021, late 2021, when she noticed that COVID vaccinated individuals who died suddenly. She looked at, cancers that they had developed, and these cancers were extremely aggressive. She notified German pathologist Dr. Arne Burkhardt. It was presented at a pathology conference in Germany. Then we had an American doctor, Dr. Ryan Cole, pathologist, start talking about aggressive cancers in 2022. I started talking about aggressive cancers in mid-2022 with the Canadian Medical Association. And I would have talked about it online, except that I was actually banned from Twitter for a year. Got my little guy here. This is one of
I love that. My little guys are just on the other side of the camera right now, and my dog.
he keeps circling my desk here. So this was noticed by a number of brilliant pathologists. This concept of turbo cancer.
Yeah.
And I noticed it in vaccinated Canadian doctors who started coming down, young doctors started coming down with these extremely aggressive cancers. And, I mean, we were silenced for talking about it. We were silenced from bringing it up. And one thing I wanted to mention to you a little bit earlier was that there are a number of, I would say, taboo subjects around the COVID-19 vaccines that doctors were simply not allowed to talk about, not allowed to give informed consent to patients, not allowed to warn their patients. Parents were not allowed to have this information for their children when they rolled out the COVID vaccines in children. And I would say the three main things that have to this day not been admitted by the medical establishment, public health officials, really any kind of health official in any position of power, any of the politicians, they've admitted the myocarditis, they've admitted the blood clots. AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson were taken off the markets because they were causing blood clots. And Pfizer and Moderna were causing the same amount of blood clots, if not more. But those stayed on the market for some reason. But they've admitted it can damage the heart. In fact, now I think we're going to get maybe a black box label on the COVID-19 vaccines, because FDA has finally admitted that children died after taking the vaccine. Now they've admitted to 10 child deaths that they have in their database. There have actually been thousands of children who have died after taking COVID-19 vaccines. I discovered about 500 dead children in the VAERS reporting system. And the reason why that's not talked about is because a lot of these child deaths are actually hidden. They scrubbed and altered the VAERS reports in such a way that you cannot, when you search by age, the age field is left blank. So you get the child's age only in the description. You don't get it in the age column. So when you search, they don't come up. You have to do very specific searches to get these dead children to even come up in the VAERS system. And so, doctors were instructed by the medical boards in the United States and in Canada that they were not allowed to tell people about the risks of the vaccines because they would be causing vaccine hesitancy.
Right.
And that was the official, these were official memos that went out to every single doctor in the United States, in Canada, in UK, Australia, that doctors were not allowed to warn their patients about the risks and dangers of this, which again is informed consent is the cornerstone of medical ethics in the Western world. And that was completely eliminated. And so, with the aggressive cancers, which, like I said, some of the doctors, some of the pathologists, myself and others have started to see, Professor Angus Daglish in the UK started seeing it in his patient. Famous oncologist, senior oncologist, saw his cancer patients in remission, take a booster shot. Suddenly their cancer comes roaring back, and it's a stage 4 out of control cancer. I've been talking about it since 2022, this concept of turbo cancer, and it's not allowed. This is one of the taboo injuries of the vaccine that you're not allowed to talk about. You're not allowed to talk about the turbo cancers. You're not allowed to talk about miscarriages. And of course, you're not allowed to talk about sudden deaths and, these vaccines causing the excess mortality that we're seeing in all the highly vaccinated countries.
Yeah, it's been such a travesty against humanity, and it's such a social experiment in the degree of which people will leverage their licensed, title to basically commit genocide. It's just horrific. And, we point the fingers at countries around the world that are genociding other populations or other countries, yet we don't look at who we are and what we're doing and what we are willing to sacrifice for the almighty dollar and give ourselves a pat on the back and call it that we're saving humanity. It's just disgusting. The brainwashing.
And there are still doctors who are pushing these vaccines, pretending that they're still safe and effective.
Yeah.
You still have doctors like Peter Hotez going on, TV shows and talking about how, safe and effective these things are and how terrible it is, what, RFK Jr. is doing, and that, when he cut the funding for new mRNA vaccines, how terrible that is. And these people still get on TV and are still pushing these products. We haven't had a single prosecution, which to me is absolutely incredible that we haven't had anyone prosecuted for pushing a experimental toxic cancer-causing pharmaceutical product that has killed thousands and thousands of people, has killed thousands of pregnant women, has killed thousands of children. We finally have FDA admitting that they've killed, 10 children. How many children have to die for these things to finally be taken off the market?
Yeah, perhaps they
And
should go
there's
back to the
doctors.
metric they used for the swine flu, right? When they pulled that vaccine. So
Yeah.
just on a personal level, I was diagnosed with basal cell skin cancer right on the end of my nose. It was plaguing me for several years. I said, I'm going to put ivermectin horse paste on it, the clear gel. I used castor oil as as a delivery system to expedite, because I put castor oil on my skin every night as well. And in 3 months it was gone, and it plagued me for 2 years. It was so bad. It would ulcerate, bleed, grow, change, all the stuff. It's gone, completely gone. There's not a scar left. And, I had learned about it from you. I said, what have I got to lose? They're going to disfigure my face. So I might as well at least give this a shot. It's gone.
I can tell you, I have so many skin cancer patients, and skin cancer can be really a plague, because when these things can keep coming back, right? Every 2-3 months, I have patients with basal cell carcinoma that keeps coming back. And what do they get offered by mainstream oncology? Oh, we'll cut it out. Oh, we'll cut it out again, and we'll cut it out again. It's like that's the only answer they have.
That's
right?
It.
Is to keep cutting it out. Well, you can't keep doing that every 3 months. And so I've had a number of patients. This was actually relayed to me very early on when I started an ivermectin cancer clinic about 1.5 years ago. We've been going about 1.5 years strong now. And it was, the reason I did it was because I'd written a number of articles on ivermectin in cancer on my Substack back in 2023, and really tried to share with the world that, listen, there's this whole body of research on ivermectin that everyone's ignoring, that I know that the cancer establishment is ignoring. There's over 400 papers on ivermectin in cancer that are being completely ignored, and they're being ignored because ivermectin is off patent and there's no money to be made. And so whenever you've got the medical establishment with something incredible that has amazing activity, but there's no money to be made, they bury it, or they ignore it, or they ridicule it, right? Or in the case of, ivermectin for COVID-19, when it was a danger to a multi-$100 billion mRNA industry, they do everything to try to discredit and bury it.
That's exactly right.
And so when I actually dug through this research, and I went and I read every single paper, every single one of these 400 papers on ivermectin in cancer, I read them, I started sharing them on my Substack, sharing this research, and we came across the idea that topical ivermectin was actually, had effectiveness in skin cancers, and not just basal skin cancer, but squamous cell carcinomas and melanomas as well. And so, people who were, very proactive with their health, they started using it, trying it. And within a couple of months, I had patients telling me that their skin cancers would just start shrinking. And after a few weeks, maybe a month or two, would just fall off and would be gone, and they'd go to their dermatologist, and their dermatologist would check them out, and they'd get biopsies, and the cancer was gone. And it's such a simple solution. It is such a simple solution. Like you mentioned, ivermectin paste that you can get anywhere. Mix it with a little bit of
Tractor Supply, Amazon, just saying.
Exactly. Amazon, Tractor Supply.
$8-10 a tube.
Exactly. And you mixed it with a little bit of castor oil, which is actually brilliant. I'm doing this with a lot of cancer patients right now for any topical application of tumors. We're doing it with breast tumors. We're doing it with lymphomas, tumors that you can feel just under the skin. They're shrinking. What the castor oil does is the castor oil will actually bring the ivermectin deeper under the skin. Castor oil itself has very interesting properties in that it can break up tumors. And so, you combine the two, and you can treat any skin cancer. It's amazing, and it's something that every family doctor should know. Every family doctor should be using in their practice, right?
I agree.
But we have
no need to disfigure people.
But we have this stigma with ivermectin, and the reason is because the FDA, the CDC, and all these health agencies conspired to smear ivermectin and try to bury it so that they could roll out this multi-$100 billion profitable mRNA vaccine technology, these contaminated toxic vaccines that don't work. And they're not about to abandon that cash cow, and they want to keep going. That's why Larry Ellison's in the White House, pushing these products on cancer patients.
That's right. Well, your Substack is fantastic. I actually have one of the articles up, and I'll pull back here in a minute to the main page. But you published remarkable testimonials involving ivermectin, mebendazole, fenbendazole, and CBD oil. This is one of your most recent publications. What compelled you to document these stories, knowing that the medical system was going to respond in such a virulent fashion where they were going to come after you? Not only you, but look at how many cancer doctors have, quotes, passed away suddenly. They've been unalived. And it's not just one or two, it's an alarming amount of doctors. Are you finding safety in numbers now, or do you still feel like this is really sort of a hallowed ground you're tiptoeing through carefully because you're blasting it out there?
Yeah, when I started writing about antiparasitics being effective in cancer in 2023 and early 2024, I had cancer patients coming to me telling me, we've tried these things, and they didn't know the dosing. And this was one of the things I realized very early on, is that people wanted guidance, they wanted help, they wanted an idea of how to use these things, how to use these repurposed drugs like ivermectin for cancer. It's not the same dose as you use for COVID-19, for example. When you have a respiratory infection and you want to use ivermectin, you use maybe 12 milligrams, maybe 24 milligrams. Well, in cancer, you have to use 60 milligrams or 72 milligrams or 100 milligrams. The doses are about 5 to 10 times higher in cancer to get the effectiveness. But patients were coming to me and they were telling me incredible stories of their tumors shrinking. These were often stage 4 cancer patients. I had one patient come to me and tell me that her oncologist told her she shouldn't be alive because she had a devastating cholangiocarcinoma. This was a cancer of the bile ducts. She should have been dead, within a couple of months. She told her patient, "You'll be dead within a couple of months. You're not going to make it this summer." And the patient comes to me the following year and says, "I shouldn't be alive, but thanks to you, I started taking ivermectin. I started taking fenbendazole because of your Substack articles." And so last summer, I decided to start coaching these patients. Health coaching in Canada is not regulated by any of the medical boards. The medical boards have no jurisdiction over health coaching. So you can help patients, you can share research with them, you can share information with them, and it's outside the medical establishment. And so I started health coaching cancer patients on repurposed drugs, on ivermectin, fenbendazole, and mebendazole, which are other antiparasitics, which are terrific in cancer as well. And, what started as me just helping a few hundred cancer patients really grew into one of the largest cancer practices in the world. We've recently celebrated 7,500 cancer patients we've helped directly and followed. I followed each of those patients. We keep a close eye on how they're doing. And when they share their successes with me, I share those successes with the world. And I think I'm the only physician doing this, where I'm sharing testimonials of patients with their own emails in their own words, their own CT reports that they send me, MRI reports, PET scan reports, what their oncologist has told them, how they feel about it. And the oncologists are almost always shocked. They're shocked at the results that these patients are seeing. Now, one thing I want to stress is that I never tell patients, don't take chemo, don't, take immunotherapy, don't do surgery. I always tell patients, look, consider all your options. Because a lot of patients come to me at stage 4, an advanced stage 4. Some patients have been given 3 months to live, 6 months to live. Their oncologist might have told them, look, after this chemo or after this immunotherapy, we have nothing left for you. So, like that's it. The oncology has nothing left, no options left to give you. And that is always a lie, because there are options. There are repurposed drug options. When you go to AI search engines and you search what are the most promising repurposed drugs in terminally ill cancer patients, almost across the board, the various AIs, the answer they will give you in the top 5, they're going to have ivermectin, fenbendazole, mebendazole. They will have antiparasitics in the top 5. Why? It's based on published research that the AI goes over. And the AI says, you know what? There's so much research here and there's so much evidence and data here. These things are the most promising. and they always put them at the top of the search engine.
It's extraordinary to me that we still didn't get that in the White House that day. Instead, we got Larry Ellison, who is, CEO of Oracle, that's done ones and zeros and bits and bytes his whole life, and is now going to talk to us about the efficacy of mRNA and cancer vaccines. And
And I can tell you why. I can tell you exactly why we've not seen, President Trump's team embrace the antiparasitics like ivermectin, mebendazole, fenbendazole, when in fact Florida has embraced them. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, his wife Casey DeSantis, have announced recently that they're allocating $60 million to ivermectin cancer research, and it could be up to $140 million that's being allocated. The Florida Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, is fully on board and fully behind, doing the research, investigating, doing the clinical trials, and so on. But, President Trump hasn't embraced it yet. And I think it's because there's no money in this. You cannot make an announcement and say, hey, we're going to make billions of dollars off this new cutting edge cancer treatments like ivermectin, mebendazole, because they're all off patent. So ivermectin, mebendazole, fenbendazole, they all went off patent in the 1990s. And the fascinating story is that Merck had a patent on ivermectin. The patent expired in the 1990s, and Merck has since come out and attacked ivermectin and said it doesn't work for COVID-19. And I was really surprised by that. I thought, why would Merck do that? I mean, sure, they can't make money off it anymore, but why would they attack a Nobel Prize winning drug that they had a patent on for 20 years? Why would they do that? Why would they do such a thing, publicly attack it? Well, it turns out they are in a 50-50 partnership with Moderna to produce the mRNA cancer vaccines that Larry Ellison was talking about in the White House, that this was their $500 billion Stargate project where they were going to use AI to help them produce mRNA cancer vaccines that they were going to charge $500,000 to use. And so you see now Merck, this patent holder for ivermectin, involved in a 50-50 profit-sharing partnership with Moderna to pump out these toxic mRNA vaccines, but for use in cancer. And we see this over and over again.
Yeah.
We see it with mebendazole and fenbendazole. I think mebendazole, Johnson & Johnson had the patent originally, and now they're in the cancer business, and they're trying to profit from the turbo cancers that are the result of the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines. And so we see all these giant big pharma companies moving towards profiting in cancer. We see it with Pfizer. In fact, Pfizer last year had one of the biggest acquisitions ever, a $42 billion acquisition of Seagen, as a relatively small company that has like $1 billion in revenue. But what is their main thing? It's cancer drugs. They've got a bunch of cancer drugs on the market, and they've got a bunch of cancer drugs in the pipeline. And so Pfizer told us, well, we're done making profit on mRNA vaccines because nobody wants them, because everyone's starting to figure out that these things are causing heart attacks, neurological problems, autoimmune problems, and turbo cancers. So we're moving into the cancer business, and we're going to make money off cancer for the next 10 years.
This is we started with the climate crisis, 30, 40 years ago, right? The inconvenient truth. And then recently Bill Gates, whose foundation was on the very first SARS-CoV-2 patent, was talking about just recently, climate's over, we're good. Now it's AI. And we see AI revolution everywhere. In fact, I'm going to bring it up in my next interview because I'll be interviewing somebody running for Senate in North Carolina, U.S. Senator for North Carolina, Don Brown. And I want to address this with him. But to me, it seems like we're forever chasing the next big thing that we can throw trillions of dollars at, which really become a factory to launder money for your special interest groups like Big Pharma that, facilitate the people that we see around us in our government. And of course, cancer is a very big business. And then of course, RNA is proving to be very profitable with the numbers that you're talking about. There's a lot of parallels here between what I see happening in medicine and the broader trend of government overreach, where dissent becomes criminalized and the truth becomes dangerous. Are you seeing these same parallels, Dr. Makis?
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, there are, a couple of dozen doctors who've really stood up to this, stood up to protect medical ethics, to stand up for the Hippocratic Oath, and really to try to bring back some of these medical ethics that were lost. The patient-doctor relationship that was completely destroyed, bodily autonomy, informed consent. I mean, these are pillars of medical ethics that very few doctors are standing up for. Dr. Mary Talley Bowden of Texas, for example, stood up for them. She treated thousands of COVID patients successfully, and she's been crucified by the Texas Medical Board, who are still pursuing her, persecuting her, giving her reprimands. She's still fighting in court, and she's one of the heroes of the pandemic. And you've got a handful of doctors like this. You've got a couple of dozen doctors. Dr. Robert Malone, who's now on the ACIP committee, he's fighting very hard. You've got Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Ryan Cole, but we've all been crucified for standing up for what's right. We've lost jobs, we've lost hospital privileges, we've lost medical licenses in many cases. My medical license is still being held hostage. My financial accounts are being frozen and raided. When I started my cancer clinic, and I announced last summer that I'm going to start a cancer health coaching clinic, again, which no one had authority over and no one had jurisdiction over legally, and they knew it. So the medical board sent the police to my house, to my home, within 4 days of me starting to help cancer patients. They sent 2 officers in full tactical gear to my home on a Sunday afternoon to harass me, harass my wife, and harass my small children, just as a show of force.
Yeah.
And the police officers told me, yes, we were sent by the medical board, and you had made some speeches that we didn't like, or that the medical board didn't like, and they were really there just to harass me, and they were embarrassed to be there. But that was a sign. That was like, oh yeah, you want to stand up to the medical establishment?
That's right.
You're going to pay a price. And I've paid a heavy price. I've had my financial accounts frozen. They went after my Stripe account. They stole about $200,000 from there. Then they went after my Gift Send Go, tried to steal about $200,000 from there, so that I couldn't legally defend myself against their attacks. And they went to court. Now this is an incredible story. So this summer, the Alberta Medical Board went to court and claimed that me helping cancer patients and giving them information and research about ivermectin, fenbendazole, mebendazole, and repurposed drugs, that was dangerous. They showed up to court, and they showed up with no documents. They didn't have a single document or a single complaint from a patient, a single shred of evidence of harm. Now, ivermectin is one of the safest drugs that we have in medicine. I mean, it is probably 100 times safer than aspirin or Tylenol that you get over the counter. And yet the medical board showed up to court, said what Makis is doing is dangerous, and the court must stop him. The court must order him that he's not allowed to help anyone, not allowed to help cancer patients. And so they show up with no documents, and they show up with a pre-written court decision for the judge to sign before the court hearing even started. I mean, talk about rigging a court hearing. I mean, we've never seen, this is just blatant corruption, right?
Yeah.
I had told people about the court date, so the courtroom was packed with people from the public, and the judge was so embarrassed that he was caught red-handed in this attempt to rig a court hearing to effectively criminalize ivermectin here in Alberta, Canada, so that he actually had to start crossing out the pre-written court order that was given to him by the medical board, so that it wouldn't look like they all rigged the court hearing together. So we caught them committing fraud. Now we're taking it to Alberta's Supreme Court to get it thrown out. Unfortunately, it's a long process that takes time. They're dragging their feet. They're not agreeing to court dates and court decisions. But in one of the court decisions that they got the judge to order me to remove Dr. MD and my credentials from all my social media accounts. That's why I had to change my Twitter handle from at Makis MD to at Makis Medicine. I had to remove MD doctor and all these titles because that's how they're trying to shut me down. That's how they're trying to stop me from helping cancer patients. And they couldn't conclude that ivermectin was dangerous in any way, or that it could hurt anyone or has harmed anyone. So the judge concluded that he was doing this because ivermectin might harm someone in the future. Well, this is, yes, you can make up anything like that and try to pretend that it might harm someone in the future. And you have absolutely nothing to back that up.
No.
Within a few weeks of that fiasco, that absolute scandal that really should have brought down the Alberta government entirely, the head of Alberta's medical board resigned, and he quietly resigned into retirement, and the whole thing has been under a media blackout, right? And so, but these are the lengths that they're willing to go to, that the politicians are willing to go to, that health authorities are willing to go to stop people who are helping cancer patients. This was an attack on cancer patients, and to try to say that ivermectin is dangerous. And they put out, big press releases on the Alberta Medical Board website warning people, this is dangerous, don't do this, don't listen to Dr. Makis. And it's really to try to stop cancer patients from getting help, from getting access to something that could help them. We have teams at the border, at the Canadian border, the Canadian Border Service agents, who have been given instructions to rip open any package that they might suspect has ivermectin in it. So a lot of Canadians will order ivermectin through IndiaMart, and they will get the generics from India. When they see a package from India, they rip it open. I don't get a package now that isn't ripped apart and then retaped with a yellow seal by the Canadian Border Services Agency.
They did it to me. The FDA did it to me when I ordered ivermectin from India and some other medications. They did the same. In fact, they took it out. They stole a whole bunch of my ivermectin. Yeah, I had to reorder it.
They steal it. They steal it. They use it for themselves. Maybe they sell it on the black market. You know. So the border agents, if you want to have ivermectin and have your family stocked up for life, just become a border agent and steal other people's packages.
If you want pocket knives and guns, go to the TSA or makeup or whatever, anything over 3 ounces.
I know, but you know what? I tell cancer patients, I said, you should label it heroin and fentanyl, because that they're going to wave through. Like they're going to wave that through. They're going to be like, have your package, have as much fentanyl and heroin and cocaine and drugs as you want, because
that's right.
It's the Canadian government, like the Canadian government supports.
You're 100% right about that. I think that's hysterical. I want to come back to Florida, though. I live in Florida, and so we're very excited down here. In fact, Dr. Betsy Eads, who's a friend of mine, she's in the chat right now, but putting her stuff's coming up on the screen. She's a huge fan. She's in your Substack. She's welcoming you to Florida. She's completely agreeing with everything that you're talking about. But I want to talk about coming soon to Florida, as you mentioned in your 7,500 cancer patient exciting post in Substack. Talk to us about Florida. What are your plans here? Other than I know that Governor DeSantis is getting behind this and they're going to put a lot of money behind this. What is your role going to be, or is there one going to be?
Absolutely. So the goal is really to make Florida the leader in cutting edge cancer research.
Love this.
In cutting edge cancer treatments, and really Florida is going to lead the way. To me, there's no question about it. The support is there. Governor DeSantis, fully supportive of this, wants there to be enough funding for research for ivermectin, mebendazole, all of these repurposed drugs. And I want to mention that there is a patent on mebendazole, but that Johns Hopkins has since 2021. They quietly got the patent approval for use in cancer, for use in very aggressive brain cancers. They're running a couple of small clinical trials now. They are underdosing. They are underdosing the mebendazole in their clinical trials.
Right.
My concern is that they're actually running those clinical trials to say, "Oh, look, it doesn't work,"
of course,
and don't use it. Which is what they did with ivermectin for SARS-CoV-2. Which is what they did for hydroxychloroquine. They design clinical trials that are designed to fail, so that they can come out and say, "Oh, look, it doesn't work," or they underdose it, they overdose it, and then they can come out and suppress the drugs. So this is what Johns Hopkins may be doing. They got the patents. They're underdosing their clinical trials. Maybe they come out and say it doesn't work. So we want to set up and run proper clinical trials for ivermectin, for mebendazole, other repurposed drugs. There's hydroxychloroquine, there's niclosamide, nitazoxanide. There are other antiparasitics that have efficacy in cancer. All of these need to be researched, looked at. Florida's leading the way in this. So in early 2026, the goal is to get some of these clinical trials up and running, start recruiting patients, because it takes time to run these trials. So that we could maybe get some preliminary results out there so that people can start using it. And my personal goal is to be involved in that but also to be involved in setting up physical clinics in Florida in multiple locations so that patients can come. They have somewhere they can go to and get guidance, get advice on how to use repurposed drugs in cancer. Because I've got a ton of Florida patients already right now that I'm working with. I put out testimonial success stories on Florida patients who don't have the success when they go to the large cancer centers like Mayo Clinic, right? Like the Moffitt Center. So
That's right.
these, when they add antiparasitics to their existing regimens, whether they're still on chemo or immunotherapy or whatever, you see the efficacy of those treatments skyrocket. You see tumors melting away to nothing. You see cancer patients going from stage 4 pancreatic cancer or stage 4 ovarian cancer or stage 4 colon cancer to cancer-free. And it happens in a matter of months. It could be 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. These patients go from stage 4 cancer, not curable. They're told by their oncologist, this is not curable. Your cancer may not even respond to chemo in most cases, and they go from that to being cancer-free once they add antiparasitics to their regimen. And so the goal is, for the initial trials at least, is to do these combination regimens. No one has to abandon their oncologist. If you like your oncologist, you can keep your oncologist, right? As the saying goes. Certainly you can, continue your chemo, your immunotherapy, what have you, because, to be honest, stage 4 is very difficult to deal with. I would love to avoid chemo in as many situations as possible. And you can certainly do that early on. When you try antiparasitics early on, I have breast cancer patients with large tumors that shrunk their tumors from 7 centimeters down to 2 centimeters, or they completely eliminated all their lymph nodes. When the surgeon goes in, the surgeon's shocked, and sometimes the cancer's not even there anymore. Sometimes the cancer's completely gone. I would love to avoid chemo. Chemo is very damaging and destructive to the body. But when you're at stage 4, when the cancer has gone so far and has spread, to so many places, you do need all the tools at your disposal. So, we're going to do the research. That's going to start in early 2026, and I'm working as quickly as possible to help get some of these things off the ground.
That's fantastic. If there's anything we can do down here from South Florida with any of the contacts, I'd be absolutely on board to help you in any way, shape, or form, including going out and finding space for you to put facilities down here, because we need them desperately. And again, we're talking about procedures and treatments, frankly, not even procedures, treatments that are so non-invasive. And so, there's the contraindications just are so, there's not many out there, if at all. And so, like you said, there's no reason you can't use them concomitantly with the existing treatment that you may or may not feel comfortable with. I don't know many people who went through chemo that said, oh, that was great. I have family members who are all vaxxed and boosted, still doing it and have multiple forms of cancer. They're not listening to me. So I'm going to send them this interview in hopes that finally they'll listen to me, because they keep saying, well, we don't see it in JAMA or New England Journal of Medicine, some placebo-controlled studies. I said, there's lots of these N=1 studies. They're by the thousands. And here's Dr. Makis' Substack. Start reading and see if you're not inspired. But I digress. I have a couple.
I can tell you, and I want to mention one thing, is that a fascinating sort of unexpected benefit that I've seen with ivermectin, fenbendazole, mebendazole in cancer patients is that they can tolerate chemo much better. They have a lot less chemo side effects. And so when they are on the ivermectin, and I was looking into this, no one really knows exactly why that is, why the side effects from chemo are so much less. I think it's the anti-inflammatory effect of ivermectin. Ivermectin has a very powerful anti-inflammatory effect. In fact, some of my patients with autoimmune diseases have started using ivermectin, and they're seeing benefit in rheumatoid arthritis, in lupus, psoriasis, colitis, Crohn's, colitis, even type 1 diabetes. Patients are seeing benefit because of the powerful anti-inflammatory effect. And again, you don't have the risk of Tylenol damaging your liver, right? Or the risk of bleeding
or causing autism.
Exactly. So
they found 50 years later.
I know. So the fascinating thing about ivermectin is that patients have a lot less chemo side effects. They're able to tolerate the chemo much better. And so I always suggest to my patients, I say, look, even if your oncologist has said, the chemo doesn't work, so we're just not going to try it anymore. Or if the oncologist has abandoned the chemo because of side effects or lack of efficacy, I always suggest, go back and say, well, let's give it a try again, because they can tolerate the chemo much, much better. And in some cases, ivermectin also has the property of reversing chemo resistance. And so at the molecular level, it actually resensitizes cancer cells to chemo. It removes the cancer cell ability to pump out the chemo and be resistant to chemo.
Wow.
And so particularly for pancreatic cancer patients and ovarian cancer patients who do develop resistance to chemo over time as the cancer adapts, I say, you know what, try maybe a chemo regimen again, because the ivermectin does undo the resistance to chemo, resensitizes cancer cells to chemo, and you get much more cancer cell killing. The chemo becomes efficacious again. So these are incredible properties of ivermectin that very few people know about. It's in the preclinical research. We got to get it into the clinical research, and we got to get it out there. And I'm just so proud of Florida and Governor DeSantis, Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo. I mean, they are visionaries.
Yeah,
they are visionaries in this. They see it. They've looked at these cases. They've looked at some of my success stories, some of the work that we've done. They're on board. They said, look, we need to investigate this. We need to get these clinical trials up and running.
I'm so excited to hear this. I'm jumping out of my skin. So again, I'm also a cancer survivor. I had melanoma, which led to an odyssey of finding stage 3B thyroid cancer papillary, 2006. I had a full left neck dissection. Anyway, 50 lymph nodes, 13 Mets. Had I known then what I know now, I would have been doing your regimen. I would have probably injected the primary with chlorine dioxide on top of it all. I've been taking chlorine dioxide. I've been doing everything, methylene blue, it all. But what I really like what you're saying today, Dr. Makis, is you're not disparaging Western medicine 100%. No. You're saying we can concomitantly use these treatments, and here's why it's effective. I'm giving you, and your Substack is covered with people's testimonies with their medical records. You have very graciously blacked out their personal identifiable information, but you leave everything else so that the reader can contextualize exactly the treatment methodologies that they've been deploying on themselves through their physicians using chemo, radiation, whatever the treatments are, plus your concoction of ivermectin, fenben, and mebendazole. I think it's fantastic. You're very transparent about it all. And I think you've been very transparent in this interview. And I think it's just, I appreciate it very, very much. If you were going to design, or shall I say, this is the last question for you, but if you could redesign the medical system from the ground up, what safeguards would you ensure scientific integrity and protect physicians who actually speak truth?
That's actually a very tough one, because the medical system has gone so far off the rails.
I agree.
That I think we're at a point where I don't know if it's repairable. I don't know if it's salvageable without tearing the whole system down and in a way starting from scratch, or just building a parallel system and get that going, and really let maybe the original system collapse on its own, because it is collapsing. The medical system as it is right now is collapsing. The trust in doctors is gone. We see, what is it? 99% of doctors took these COVID injections. They're suffering heart attacks, strokes. They're coming down with aggressive cancers. I see doctors who are closing their practice and retiring at 45, at 50, because they are disabled from the COVID-19 vaccines that they rushed to take and that they pushed on absolutely everyone else. We have problems with medical schools. Medical schools are pumping their students full of this leftist crap, with I haven't even, gone into the whole, mutilation of children. There's so many problems, and we've lost all medical ethics from the medical system. The patient-doctor relationship has been destroyed. Now everyone is jumping into the patient-doctor relationship. The medical boards are telling doctors what they can or can't tell their patients, share with their patients, what they can or can't treat their patients with. Now these are bureaucrats who are telling doctors, you can't use ivermectin, you can't use hydroxychloroquine, and we're not going to allow you to. And if you do, we're going to punish you. We're going to take away your license. We see health authorities stripping doctors, of their health privileges. This whole system has to be torn down. Now there are efforts underway, and again, Florida may be, maybe one of the places where this comes up, where there will be, I believe, a parallel medical licensing system created, maybe with collaboration of multiple states, to really bring back, just bring back basic medical ethics, bring back the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm, and to give protection to doctors to really practice medicine as they were meant to,
Yes.
and to practice it ethically without interference from bureaucrats, from corrupt public health officials, and from government officials. And so I think this is one of the ways we're going to see a parallel licensing system set up, get up and running, and I think Florida is going to be involved in that. And I think we're going to see a lot of doctors leaving the mainstream medical establishment. I already have a lot of doctors contacting me, telling me they want to work with me, they want to work with repurposed drugs in some of these states that are, friendly to this. We see ivermectin becoming available over the counter in a number of states. Now, I think most recently in Texas, but Tennessee and Idaho, and I think it's at least 5 or 6 states. So there is this movement.
Florida, we need Florida.
Florida, it's coming. It's coming. So it's going to be a slow process, unfortunately, and I think because of the power of the pharmaceutical industry, and President Trump has come out. One of the most shocking things I've heard President Trump say really in the past few years is when he came out, I think this was in the Oval Office, and it was one of these offhand comments. He sort of talks, freehand, and this sort of like
unscripted.
Just unscripted. And he said, yeah, the pharmaceutical industry is more powerful than the Senate, than the Congress, and then the Supreme Court.
And Susie Wiles can basically take a country out with a phone call. So there you go.
No, and my jaw was on the floor.
Sure.
I thought, wow, like you're actually admitting that the pharmaceutical industry is more powerful than every branch of government of the United States. Like that is a shocking admission for the president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, to say, well, actually, these guys are much more powerful.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it, but it's true. And I think so that's why, the medical establishment is going to keep going. They're not going to give up that power. And they're going to keep trying to push new mRNA vaccines on us and mRNA cancer vaccines. And they're going to be rolling these things out. Hopefully no one's going to be taking them. And so if I give any advice to anyone today at this interview, is don't take any mRNA vaccines. And I really would say any vaccine at all at this point. I'm certainly not going to take any vaccine at this point. My trust is gone. And I really now have to question everything else I've taken in my life and in my medical career. I took the H1N1 vaccine, the swine flu vaccine 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I took a whole slew of vaccines in my medical career when I was a medical student, medical resident, and so on, which I now, regret, but we didn't know. I mean, we were all lied to.
We trusted the guys in the white coats and stethoscopes, And they trusted their education, the Rockefeller education, which we now know is really behind all this. The Flexen report spells it out. If you were using anything but petroleum-based pharmaceuticals from the Rockefellers, you were labeled a nut job, a kook, a quack. So I think we need to get back to homeopathy. And frankly, when you look at the 1800s medical books, it talks about cancer as parasitic in nature. It lays it all out, what we're now realizing why antiparasitics are so effective in fighting cancer. It's just absolutely tremendous. I mean, I could go on for hours with you, Dr. Makis, and I know you're very busy. You've been incredibly gracious to spend this much time with me. I hope you'll come back. And I'm very serious. If I can be of any benefit or service to helping you facilitate anything here in Florida, I'm all in, because we have got to get this. And I want Florida to be that breakaway state that shows the rest of the country how it can be done. We're going to take our 10th Amendment. We're going to wrap ourselves up in our 10th Amendment, and we're going to defend ourselves from this bureaucracy, this tyranny of corporatocracy and fascism really coming out of our federal government. That really would like to genocide us with what I call a bioweapon. You're graciously calling it, just a non-vaccine.
But honestly, I'm so excited because Florida really is leading the way. Florida is the shining light right now in healthcare, in medicine, and what I would call, I guess, the medical freedom movement. And it's very exciting.
The Stand for Health Freedom folks down here are are head and shoulders above the rest, in my humble opinion.
It's very exciting to see a state really lead the way in this.
Yeah.
And I really thank, Governor DeSantis, his wife, Casey DeSantis, for taking a stand against really the pharmaceutical industry and saying, you know what, we're not going to go and look for more profit. We're going to go and try to do the best for cancer patients. And that's
Right.
what it should always be about. It should always be about the cancer patients first and foremost.
Absolutely. Dr. Makis, your work is a reminder that courage in medicine is as essential to any drug or therapy. And you've shown us what happens when a physician follows the evidence instead of an agenda, and how powerful institutions react when an honest man refuses to be silenced. Your voice, I think, really does represent and resonate with thousands of doctors who want to speak out and can't. And today you've given hope to patients who've been dismissed, ignored, told their symptoms are inconvenient to whatever the narrative is. I really want to thank you for your integrity and your fight for the truth. So I can't thank you enough for spending the afternoon with us, or at least the last hour and 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I'll definitely be back.
All right. I appreciate it. Take care, Dr. Makis. All right. And speaking of battles against entrenched institutions, coming up next is a conversation that I'm going to be having with North Carolina's U.S. Senate candidate, Don Brown. Don is taking on one of the most corrupt political machines in America with the same grit and determination that Dr. Makis brings to the medical arena. Different fields, same war. Citizens versus the establishment, medicine, politics, government. Would it surprise you to know that they're all connected? And the underdogs are rising. So let's take a quick peek here at my interview coming up with Don Brown after this quick commercial break. And this interview to remind you that the Federal Reserve is not federal and there are no reserves.
Jekyll Island, November 1910. 7 bankers meeting in secret to create America's central bank. We just can't call it that.
The 1907 panic nearly destroyed us. Banks failed, fortunes vanished.
We want to control America's money supply, create booms, trigger busts, and profit from both. And how will we do that?
We'll create money from nothing, loan it to the government, and charge interest. Legal counterfeiting, my friends.
But there's a cost. Every dollar we print steals value from existing dollars. It's a hidden tax that flows directly to us.
And it gets worse. If we ever get off the gold standard, governments can print money for wars. Endless wars become possible and profitable.
Since Americans hate central banks, we'll call it the Federal Reserve. Sounds governmental, doesn't it? It's not.
The president will appoint board members,
But we'll pick who he appoints.
We'll have 12 regional banks. Looks decentralized, democratic even. But New York banks control them all. That's us.
You're probably wondering how we're going to get this through Congress.
December 23rd, 1913. Most of Congress home for Christmas. Perfect timing for passing unpopular legislation. I'll publicly oppose our own bill in Congress. They'll pass it thinking they beat Wall Street. We'll fund university chairs, write the textbooks. They'll teach our system as economic science. Beautiful. Every American born after this will inherit debt on money we created from nothing. Generational servitude.
The Federal Reserve. Not federal, no reserves. But everyone will think it's their government protecting them.
Good afternoon.
And good afternoon, America. You know me, Ann Vandersteel. I am here today opening with a political shockwave that legacy media is doing everything it can to bury. Perhaps you haven't seen it, but there is a brand new, and I mean, this is a shocker, a real shocker, a brand new Real Clear Politics poll. The same poll you're seeing on the screen shows something very extraordinary happening in the North Carolina Senate race. Grassroots candidate Don Brown, a Navy JAG officer and former federal prosecutor, is now essentially tied with the former Republican National Committee chairman, Michael Whatley, in a hypothetical matchup to take on Democrat Roy Cooper. Hypothetical? Is it really? It sounds like this is getting really heated. That's right. Despite being outspent by at least 100-1, despite having zero national institutional support, despite facing a candidate who has the full weight of the RNC, the state GOP, and even President Trump's prior endorsement, Don Brown is neck and neck with the establishment favorite. Establishment. You know how I feel about that word. Now ask yourself, how is this even possible? This is what we now know to be, and it should be happening everywhere, in fact, as a grassroots uprising. North Carolinians are sending a message loud and clear that they will not be told who their nominees should be. They're rejecting political coronations. They're choosing a Marine-minded fighter who actually speaks to their lived experience, from failures after Hurricane Helene to the abuses of FEMA, to the danger of unregulated rare earth mineral extraction, to DCF violations that are ripping children from families without due process. And in just 70 days, the early voting starts. Today, we're going to bring the conversation that the political class doesn't want you to hear. Joining us now is Don Brown, a Navy JAG officer, a veteran advocate, former federal prosecutor, and the grassroots candidate shaking the North Carolina GOP establishment to its core. Don, it is great to have you here on Steel News. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have got a lot of ground to cover, and frankly, you are the explosion on the political scene that they don't want to recognize.
Well, thank you, Ann. No, they don't want to recognize me, but they don't. More significantly, they don't want to recognize our supporters. That is, conservative patriots, America First grassroots, who are sick and tired of having establishment apparatus trying to ram candidates down our throats. You know, in 2016, they tried to ram Jeb Bush down our throats. You saw how that went.
Right.
Democrats tried to ram Kamala down the Democrat Party's throat. Now they're trying to ram Whatley down the Republicans' throats in North Carolina. The guy's not popular. There are some people who nod their head and support him only because Trump said so. But you got to have more than that in order to win a race like this. So the poll that you mentioned is extraordinary. We can go into that a little bit more detail, but I'm just grateful for you and for the opportunity to be here and speak for a few minutes this morning.
Oh, certainly. So we're gonna take this to the limit here, because voters are seeing something that the establishment isn't seeing in their chosen candidate. This is somewhat of a rhetorical question, but there's enough media out there. There's even enough, should we say, non-establishment media, podcasters, and so forth. Why is it that you think the media is trying to bury this story? Because this truly is a political earthquake, yet barely a whisper on the mainstream coverage, really not unexpected. But is it podcasters aren't getting the message to what's happening in North Carolina?
Part of course, is that the establishment media has been given a signal to pay us no mind. And we've had to fight and struggle, just to get interviews. Now we have a wonderful publicist and we've done well considering. But I won't call out any major networks that have made us work like a dog just to get, 1/4 of the time that Whatley has gotten. But in this particular case, the interesting thing about the poll, it was conducted by a group here in North Carolina called Carolina Journal. Carolina Journal is a middle of the road Republican type of, publication. They're pro Whatley. They had not even used my name once. And then toward the end of November, this poll comes out and shows Whatley and I in a statistical tie against Cooper. Now, that's interesting for a number of reasons. He's outspent us. He has the president's endorsement. Of course, I've got Ann Vandersteel and Sidney Powell and General Mike Flynn and Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, General Jerry Boykin. I have a host of patriots that I wouldn't swap for anybody, and I love you all. And that's making a difference. But this particular organization, Carolina Journal, had not even mentioned my name at all until they published this poll showing me and Whatley both running neck and neck in a statistical tie against Cooper almost a year before the election. Now, what they did not show is significant, and they did not show me and Whatley one-on-one. But my suspicion is you're not going to poll Brown versus Cooper, Whatley versus Cooper, and fail to poll Brown versus Whatley. My suspicion is they're holding that third poll because it's embarrassing to their candidate. We've seen a number of snap polls on Twitter and other internet sites showing us running away with this thing. Of course, you might argue, well, those aren't quote unquote scientific, but they are certainly a pulse of what the grassroots are saying and feeling here on the ground in North Carolina. So it's interesting. It really is.
It certainly is. I look at this as possibly becoming a referendum on the RNC establishment versus grassroots America First. What say you?
Well, part of the background here, and maybe useful for your listeners to know, is that, of course, Whatley was the chair of the North Carolina Republican Party before he became the co-chair, or whatever you want to call him, of the National Republican Party, where Laura Trump was kind of babysitting him. But 3 years after the 2020 election fiasco, when we had all the questions about the ballot marking device machines, Dominion, Hart Intercivic, ES&S, Whatley puts himself up for re-election as chair of the North Carolina Republican Party and has the team develop the cell phone app under which the election for the chair would take place on the cell phone app. And that just ripped the party apart, because that cell phone app, first of all, there's a push toward paper ballots, and especially within the North Carolina Republican Party, the push toward paper ballots. He has a cell phone app. He's running against a patriot named John Kane, and you can't verify anything about it. There were reports that folks outside of the convention hall were voting, even reports of folks outside of the state who can't even be verified as legitimate voters voting in the North Carolina in the chairmanship race in 2023, again, 3 years after the 2020 fiasco. So because of that, the North Carolina Republican Party is split down the middle, probably more than down the middle. They were split our way because there was so much disgust about that little shenanigan that he pulled. And so a lot of folks don't realize that, but there was already a grassroots against this fellow before the president decided to, I suppose, anoint him. And as far as we know, not only we know he wasn't the president's first choice, because we know Laura Trump was, but above and beyond that, we have credible sources that the president talked to at least two other members of the North Carolina congressional delegation about primarying Tillis. So it's likely that Whatley is probably the president's third or fourth choice. He would get right down to it. He was not selected for the cabinet. There were 15 major cabinet positions. He wasn't one of the 15. He wasn't selected as the White House chief of staff, as we hear that he wanted to be. And so here we are. The president, we love the president in many ways, but a number of his endorsements, he endorsed Lindsey Graham. What else do I need to say? And so I tell folks in North Carolina, well, the president endorsed him. I said, well, General Flynn and Dan Vandersteel are with me, and that gets their attention. And then I say, hey, you're going to vote for Lindsey Graham if he moves to North Carolina and runs for the Senate? And they kind of look there with a blank face. And so we just kind of take a grain of salt. I think these endorsements are meaning less and less, as reflected in that poll. And I can guarantee you, Carolina Journal did not want to publish the results of that poll.
No, I'm sure they didn't. And frankly, if I was to, assess where these endorsements are coming from, they're coming from right here. This woman right here, Susie Wiles. Susie Wiles, and I'm not, you can comment on this or not, that's totally up to you, but she got honored as the Statesman of the Year by the Florida GOP. But if you really dive into Susie Wiles, she's very well connected into the governor's candidate that got the nod from President Trump, Byron Donalds, who's unfortunately for him, all of his malfeasance and issues that are just surfacing like just bad, dirty laundry is popping up everywhere. And then, of course, you also look at the connection back to the RNC chair, Michael Whatley, his connection to Susie Wiles and so on and so forth. And then you consider Lindsey Graham, who has worked very closely with John McCain, who was very instrumental with his team to bring the Russian dossier collusion hoax nonsense out. So, the nonsense continues, it continues, and it always comes back to the same sewer. So I agree with you. I don't think these Trump endorsements are carrying a lot of weight these days, and Americans are waking up to it because, frankly, they're feeling the pain of these Trump endorsements because we're seeing the establishment swamp continue to flourish, and the lack of accountability and due process for the people who needed it is not forthcoming. So, do you have an opinion on the connectivity of Susie Wiles and some of these endorsements and why they're just not resonating with Americans at this point?
I do sort of have an opinion. I can tell you that if you look at the history of this race today, Tillis is the still sitting incumbent senator in North Carolina, and had become extremely unpopular in many ways because he was trying to undermine the president's agenda. Part of that had to do with undermining the president's nominees. And as you know, I've worked with Pete Hegseth in the past, and we worked very closely on at least a couple of military justice cases. And the president wound up pardoning Lieutenant Clinton Lawrence, an Army paratrooper, 82nd Airborne. Pete and I worked very closely on together with some other JAG officers as well, not just me, but a team of us working on the case. And so, but Pete and I became friends during that period of time. And one of the things that that really set me off is that Tillis had promised that he would support the president's nominees coming out of committee. So Pete comes out of the Armed Services Committee, and you would think he was clear. And then at that point, Tillis tried to torpedo that nomination anyway by getting some statement from one of Pete's former sister-in-law, something like that. It didn't go anywhere, but Tillis tried. I jumped in. At that point, there were three candidates in the Republican race. It was me. I jumped in. Another Republican, Andy Nilsen, had been in the race. Andy's now out of the race. A good guy is out of the race, and Tillis, and so we move on into the spring, and General Flynn first endorsed me early June, and has re-endorsed, by the way, and I appreciate that. But not long after that, the president became so disenchanted with Tillis that Tillis dropped out of the race. So when Tillis dropped out of the race, in some ways it changed the dynamic because the principal target number one was already gone. So you ask about Susie Wiles. At that point, our campaign had some communication with the White House, and we were told that we would have an opportunity to make our case before the president endorsed anybody, because he said, I'm going to endorse somebody. And so he went for about a solid month with Laura Trump sort of toying with the idea of it. I never believed she was going to really jump in anyway. I made the public statement. If he jumped in, I would have gone to the beach. She didn't jump in. I didn't think she was going to jump in. So when she did not jump in, then Whatley appears out of the blue, and Trump, I suppose, endorses him or whatever he's done with him. So to answer your question, we were told by the White House we would have an opportunity to make our case. We were never given that opportunity. Not that it would have necessarily made any difference, but we were told that. And so I suspect that your suspicions on how this came about is probably dead on and right on mark.
Well, I think that is going to continue to be exposed. It's unfortunate that good Americans who have done well for this country for decades are expendable when it comes to this administration and overlooked for establishment, for status quo, because this runs antithetical to everything that MAGA stood for, what we believed we were going to see after Trump won, when we got Trump back again, and we all worked our tails off to get him back in. Millions of Americans did that. And so I think the level of disappointment at this time can only be outshined by people like you who continue to do the right thing for the right reasons, even when the right people aren't looking or are being persuaded to look somewhere else. So that being said, let's get back to your state, because your state was hit hard after Hurricane Helene. I was there for 10 weeks on the ground. I witnessed and exposed FEMA's failures and overreach. They were just basically impossible to ignore. You've spoken about restoring constitutional authority at the state level. What does that look like in practice so that we can, sort of keep FEMA and the federal government's usurpation of your constitutional right, keep the folks in North Carolina out of that harm's way?
Well, I proposed what's called a Deep State Reduction Act. And in other words, under the proposal, and it's a proposal, George S. Patton said this. He said, an imperfect plan recklessly and violently executed is better than a perfect plan sitting on the shelf and gathering dust. It's kind of in line with what FEMA, Lord have mercy, Elon Musk and Doge proposed when they proposed elimination of 300 out of 400 federal agencies. We need to have a radical approach like that. And if an agency cannot be absolutely justified from the Constitution, it's got to go. And that's for a number of reasons. We have an exploding national debt, $37,000 a second. The national debt continues to explode. And we're going to go off a cliff if we don't arrest it. FEMA is one of the agencies that would go into the ash heap of history. In Western North Carolina, the estimates right now are we're still $60-70 billion short of monies that are needed to restore people back in their homes, et cetera. What I would like to see is that money set aside in the trust fund administered by 3 organizations. I would have Samaritan's Purse as one of the organizations because they've been so effective on the ground. Probably another Christian or charitable organization, maybe Adam Smith's group, and then a third organization consisting of the local counties that are affected. And let those folks get the money directly to where it needs to be to rebuild. The problem right now that we've had both with FEMA here, and you may or may not be aware of this, but Hurricane Matthew came through 9 years ago in eastern North Carolina. If you get a chance to go to Craven County, you should do that. There's still at least 5,000 North Carolinians whose homes have been displaced because of the Democrats' foolishness there. But they set up these bureaucratic organizations, and then they make it almost impossible to get the money out of these organizations. And the organizations just keep the money themselves. So you've got to attack the problem. That means getting rid of
lost everything.
What FEMA
we lost buildings.
FEMA's gotten in the way. They come in and they that we have reports of them coming in, when you have churches that have been, well stocked with foods and blankets and mattresses, and people want to take control of the property and determine where it goes. They've been nothing but obstructionists. When Reagan said you got to get the government off to get back to the people, this applies largely to hurricane relief as well. So we're going to try to get something to get. There's a long ways to go. As you may know, Watley was appointed by President Trump as the czar to finish the problem.
In the wake of Helene and through my investigation over the following month, it seems
it's a tragedy, and my heart goes out to those people. And I still speak to a lot of people on the ground there, and we're looking at some of the most ridiculous, obstructions of people getting their lives
leading
restored,
to more
such
serious
as
questions than answers.
8,000 homes that had small bridges
kept on saying they were
crossed
finding
little
bodies,
brooks or streams, or just teeny little bodies of water.
Questions about
and
weather
they're bridges that were built to support emergency vehicles, etc. But now, because of new statutes and so forth, they've got to build it to interstate highway code, which is $50,000, $60,000 or more.
And
it's insanity. These people don't have the money, and of course they know this. So they're trying to prevent the ability for
when
these
you
people
lose
to move
everything,
back home.
it's like
of
your
course, moving
birth
their goalposts
certificate,
of what
all
considers to
your
be
bank
flood zone,
statements, and
eliminating the
like
ability for people to rebuild, the constant disruption of getting these permits. All of this has really left people in harm's way. And then, of course, child protective services. We'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk about lithium, quartz, silicon, rare earth mineral extraction, because again, I looked at what happened in the hurricane. I looked at the Defense Production Act. I looked at the DOD, the Department of Energy, and North Carolina sits on some of the richest lithium quartz deposits in America. But residents fear the environmental destruction, the corporate theft, and the foreign buyouts. What is your position? Would you support the citizen-owned mineral royalty model similar to Alaska's permanent fund?
Purchased it in a generator.
I'm
got a
getting
letter
some
saying
coming in on the back of your audio there, so I'm not sure what that is.
FEMA, on the other hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me do. Is that off? Is that out?
You are loud. Lehman Charlie, as we say in the military, loud and clear.
Lehman Charlie. Sorry about that.
You're now Lehman Charlie. I heard I heard some questions about rare earth minerals, but I couldn't hear a whole lot of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's no worries. I thought I had the audio muted. My apologies, because it wasn't playing on my end, so I'm not sure why you would even hear it. I apologize for that.
It was good work, though. I'll tell you.
Sorry about that. Well, the good news is the audience didn't get distracted with that. But I was talking about your rare earth minerals, your lithium, your quartz. And of course, the folks in your community really do fear environmental destruction, the corporate theft, the foreign buyouts. What's your position? Would you actually support a citizen-owned mineral royalty model like what they do in Alaska with the permanent fund?
I think that will be helpful. You think about it, Ann. When we look at what we've come through with COVID and all of the woke policies that have been that the government has used major corporations to ram down our throats. Mussolini himself said that corporatism is the cornerstone of fascism.
Yes.
And therefore I believe in local ownership. I'm not talking about in a socialist way, but I mean getting local folks involved in order to protect the resources, to protect the land, to protect the environment. Western North Carolina is a target in many ways. These 25 counties are some of the most precious resources, some of the most precious people, some of the most down to earth and God-fearing, red-blooded Americans that you will find anywhere in the country. And so we're looking at the danger of raping the land through lithium mines, and all the way to overzealous developers trying to come in and change the nature of the land. And so I would be favorable to looking at some sort of model to try to strike that balance. But I want to make sure there are all kinds of concerns about the federal lack of response and the delay. And why is that delay there? They're trying to starve people out so they'll get them out of the area and then come in and eventually try to take the land through eminent domain. That's why I'm saying earlier, you got to find out a way to put together a fund administered by organizations that we can trust. And notice when I said Samaritan's Purse, I'm not, because they have been on the ground, and I trust Franklin Graham with his ability to reach people. I want to find private folks rather than governmental entities to try to get the money out to these folks. So,
sure.
But to answer your question, yes, I would favorably look at something like that in order to try to put a block on what appears to be a very dangerous red sign here.
Yeah, it really does. And of course, you have to layer on the fact that President Trump and his administration are pushing for a massive, America to be the #1 AI country in the world, right? We're going to be it. And we're seeing, we've got a battle right here in my backyard. They want to build the largest data center for AI right here in the backyard of where I live. And you can better believe we're going to be fighting that tooth and nail. It's a strain on our water resources, on the environment, on the indigenous creatures that live around here. And of course, I have to ask myself, is AI, the new push for AI, considering we now know, the gatekeeper of climate change himself, Bill Gates, all of a sudden miraculously decided, the climate's fine, no worries at all. But you know what? AI is where it's at. So to me, I feel like we're exchanging one giant taxpayer NGO money laundering hoax for another. Right. Where do you see all this stacking up?
Well, I wish that the Doge cuts had been codified. And as Elon himself pointed out, these NGOs, they have the same model. They'll step forward with some sort of altruistic goal: save the whales, save the penguins, save the spotted owls, save the Democrats, whatever it is. They've only got to give away 5%. All the money inside of them grows tax-free. And if I've got enough money to set up private foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I can take the money from one to give to the next, It becomes a circular cesspool, and it goes to help Democrat causes. And the root of the problem is the tax system that we have. If you eliminate the income tax, you eliminate the deductions, these NGOs go away, but they're pushing agendas and you can't trust them. And you've got to look with a great deal of suspicion now that Gates has gone from climate change, he was in the vaccines business for a while there too, and I assume that he probably is, know, and so from there to climate change now to AI, it is a suspicious concern. And I think that we need to change the track structure to end these NGOs. They have altruistic purposes. They never solve the problem they're trying to solve anyway. They use it as a money drawing scam, and they should not be. There should not be a tax system that allows these creatures to function, in my opinion.
Could not agree with you more. I think the entire Internal Revenue Service is a scam. I think most Americans agree with that. In fact, I met a gentleman who was a very high net worth tax attorney, and he told me once he met me on the plane, and he looked at me and said, "I know who you are." And I laughed, and I thought to myself, if this is a good or a bad thing. And he said, "No, you're doing the right thing, because 60% of Americans aren't filing returns anymore. They know it's voluntary. They know they don't have to, and they know it's a scam, and they know the money isn't coming back into the country." So, I think people are finally waking up to that. President Trump has alluded to it. Yes. Governor DeSantis in Florida has talked about, eliminating property tax. Right. Paul Renner doing the same, who's running for, the governor's slot. So there is this conversation that's happening out there. And I'm glad to see you put it in black and red on your website. So I appreciate that.
We're going to push for an Internal Revenue Service Elimination Act, which is on our website. And, I know you probably heard the president's interview with Joe Rogan. Some have, some haven't. And of course, I have a great deal of respect for the president. He's pardoned two of my clients.
Yes, absolutely. We want him to be successful. Absolutely.
Yeah. But if you think about his, he goes from talking about the Civil War, how that Robert E. Lee lived inside of Lincoln's head because he couldn't beat Lincoln until he found a drunk from Ohio named U.S. Grant. And he goes from there to the need for nuclear energy to be restored, but with small reactors like the French. And then he goes from there to tariffs, and of course he talks about all the money that was brought in by tariffs during the McKinley administration. But the thing that is not said that folks should think about is this: that during that period of time, from 1880 until about 1913, when, in my judgment, we made the largest constitutional mistake ever with the 16th Amendment to bring the income tax in. That's a huge mistake. During that period of time, about 33, 34, 35 years, the United States underwent the greatest industrial revolution in history. Right. But here's the rest of the story: was zero income tax.
Right.
Zero income tax. And it's got to go, because it isn't just the lack of fairness of the system, with 60% not filing or paying anyway, with the money going overseas, but it's these NGO creatures that exist out there that allow billionaires like Bill Gates and George Soros and others to effectuate public policy on their own terms, because the tax system is corrupt.
That's
so
right.
You just get rid of it, you cut it out, and it's got to go. And I will continue. I will fight for that from the floor of the Senate. I know we're going to have some more help on that, but it's a torch that has to be borne, and I'm prepared to do that.
Do you have some creatures in the Senate, maybe those running or those already there, some folks that you think you might align with to find the political will to drag this across the finish line?
You got a small number of those who might be candidates. Maybe Rand Paul will be a candidate. Maybe Mike Lee will be a candidate. I don't know what Senator Kennedy would say about it. I don't know what Ted Cruz would say about it. The Senate itself is full of a bunch of, the Republicans are full of a bunch of rhino moderates.
Yeah.
Some are a lot worse than others. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, look at Texas, John Cornyn. Look at here in North Carolina with Tillis. Look across the border here. My office right now is 3 miles from the South Carolina. We go across the line, you got Lindsey Graham.
Yes.
So, but we've got to start building constitutional conservatives within the Senate.
That's
I've thought about that. Who am I going to align with? Those names, come to mind. I mean, Ron Johnson, maybe up in Wisconsin, did a lot of he caught out the vax, and he was pretty outspoken on some of the election fraud stuff. But we still, the problem we have as Republicans, I've made this argument a lot of times, and I'll make it again. The Democrat Congresses historically, especially in the beginning of the 20th century, have been disastrous. It's been Democrat Congresses that brought in the 16th Amendment for federal income tax. That brought in the First Income Tax Act under Woodrow Wilson. That brought in the Federal Reserve Act, all in that one swoop. And then you move into the 1930s with Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, and that's when the deep state began to explode. And then you have Lyndon Johnson with the Great Society in the 60s. And then you have Obamacare. Those are 4 huge moves from Democrat Congresses that have basically changed who we are and turned us into a monopolistic. I'm looking for that word, deep state, with these creatures with tentacles. But Republican Congress has been weak. When we had control of Congress, we have failed to eradicate the Democrats' damage. And you go back, and if you want one example of that, look at McCain with Obamacare. And we have to have the Constitution calls for the Congress to step up as the first branch of government. And we've had weak Republican leadership. We're going to have to go after this deep state and take it out. And they're going to cry and whine. It's like they said about Margaret Thatcher. They called her the milk snatcher. But we're going to have to take away Obamacare. We're going to have to take away Obama phones. We're going to have to take away all these goods and services they think they're entitled to. And it's going to mean a war to do it. But if we don't do it, we're going to lose $1. And if we lose $1, here's what's going to happen. And if you go back and you look in history, every major nation that's ever controlled the earth has had the dominant currency of the earth. You read the New Testament, the Romans had the denarius. And then the President Trump talks about a golden age. He's talking about the Dutch. The Dutch had the gilding. A couple of months ago, we had Columbus Day. The Spanish had the peso. The British, they said that the sun would never set on British soil, had the pound sterling, which fell to the dollar at Bretton Woods.
Day starting out great, and watch the weight just fall off. Watch the energy increase, the brain fog lift, and of course the answer.
And I think that we need to change the track structure to end these NGOs. They have altruistic purposes. They never solve the problem they're trying to solve anyway. They use it as a money drawing scam, and they should not be. There should not be a tax system that allows these creatures to function, in my opinion.
Could not agree with you more. I think the entire Internal Revenue Service is a scam. I think most Americans agree with that. In fact, I met a gentleman who was a very high net worth tax attorney, and he told me once he met me on the plane, and he looked at me and said, "I know who you are." And I laughed, and I thought to myself, if this is a good or a bad thing. And he said, "No, you're doing the right thing, because 60% of Americans aren't filing returns anymore. They know it's voluntary. They know they don't have to, and they know it's a scam, and they know the money isn't coming back into the country." So, I think people are finally waking up to that. President Trump has alluded to it. Yes. Governor DeSantis in Florida has talked about, eliminating property tax. Right. Paul Renner doing the same, who's running for, the governor's slot. So there is this conversation that's happening out there, and I'm glad to see you put it in black and red on your website. So I appreciate that.
We're going to push for an Internal Revenue Service Elimination Act, which is on our website. And, I know you probably heard the president's interview with Joe Rogan. Some have, some haven't. And of course, I have a great deal of respect for the president. He's pardoned 2 of my clients.
Yes,
Lawrence,
absolutely. We want him to be successful. Absolutely. Yeah.
But if you think about his, he goes from talking about the Civil War, how that Robert E. Lee lived inside of Lincoln's head because he couldn't beat Lincoln until he found a drunk from Ohio named U.S. Grant. And he goes from there to the need for nuclear energy to be restored, but with small reactors like the French. And then he goes from there to tariffs. And of course, he talks about all the money that was brought in by tariffs during the McKinley administration. But the thing that is not said that folks should think about is this, that during that period of time, from 1880 until about 1913, when, in my judgment, we made the largest constitutional mistake ever with the 16th Amendment to bring the income tax in. That's a huge mistake. During that period of time, about 33, 34, 35 years, the United States underwent the greatest industrial revolution in history. Right. But here's the rest of the story: was zero income tax.
Right.
Zero income tax. And it's got to go, because it isn't just the lack of fairness of the system, with 60% not filing or paying anyway, with the money going overseas, but it's these NGO creatures that exist out there that allow billionaires like Bill Gates and George Soros and others to effectuate public policy on their own terms, because the tax system is corrupt.
That's
so
right.
you just get rid of it, you cut it out, and it's got to go. And I will continue. I will fight for that from the floor of the Senate. I know we're going to have some more help on that, but it's a torch that has to be borne, and I'm prepared to do that.
Do you have some creatures in the Senate, maybe those running or those already there, some folks that you think you might align with to find the political will to drag this across the finish line?
You got a small number of those who might be candidates. Maybe Rand Paul will be a candidate. Maybe Mike Lee will be a candidate. I don't know what Senator Kennedy would say about it. I don't know what Ted Cruz would say about it. The Senate itself is full of a bunch of, the Republicans are full of a bunch of rhino moderates. Yeah. Some are a lot worse than others. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, look at Texas, John Cornyn. Look at here in North Carolina with Tillis. Look across the border here. My office right now is 3 miles from the South Carolina. We go across the line, you got Lindsey Graham.
Yes.
So, but we've got to start building constitutional conservatives within the Senate.
That's
I've thought about that. Who am I going to align with? Those names come to mind. I mean, Ron Johnson, maybe up in Wisconsin, did a lot of he caught out the vax, and he was pretty outspoken on some of the election fraud stuff. But we still, the problem we have as Republicans, I've made this argument a lot of times, and I'll make it again. The Democrat Congresses historically, especially in the beginning of the 20th century, have been disastrous. It's been Democrat Congresses that brought in the 16th Amendment for federal income tax. That brought in the first Income Tax Act under Woodrow Wilson. That brought in the Federal Reserve Act, all in that one swoop. And then you move into the 1930s with Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, and that's when the deep state began to explode. And then you have Lyndon Johnson with the Great Society in the 60s, and then you have Obamacare. Those are four huge moves from Democrat Congresses that have basically changed who we are and turned us into a monopolistic. I'm looking for that word, deep state, with these creatures with tentacles. But Republican Congress has been weak. When we've had control of Congress, we have failed to eradicate the Democrats' damage. And you go back, and if you want one example of that, look at McCain with Obamacare. And we have to have the Constitution calls for the Congress to step up as the first branch of government. And we've had weak Republican leadership. We're going to have to go after this deep state and take it out. And they're going to cry and whine. It's like they said about Margaret Thatcher. They called her the milk snatcher. But we're going to have to take away Obamacare. We're going to have to take away Obama phones. We're going to have to take away all these goods and services they think they're entitled to. And it's going to mean a war to do it. But if we don't do it, we're going to lose $1. And if we lose $1, here's what's going to happen. And if you go back and you look in history, every major nation that's ever controlled the earth has had the dominant currency of the earth. You read the New Testament, the Romans had the denarius. And then the President Trump talks about a golden age. He's talking about the Dutch. The Dutch had the gilding. A couple of months ago, we had Columbus Day. The Spanish had the peso. The British, they said that the sun would never set on British soil, had the pound sterling, which fell to the dollar at Bretton Woods. And we're an economic superpower because of the dollar. But we just keep exploding the debt and exploding the debt. And once the dollar collapses, because we don't have the discipline to reduce the debt. See, it doesn't matter just slowing the rate of spending. Yeah, we slowed the rate of spending since Biden was in from about $55,000 a second, the debt exploding, increasing in that now to about $37,000 a second. I was going up to Asheville about a month ago. Anna, you've probably seen this site. It's usdebtclock.org.
Yes.
Yeah, and so usdebtclock.org. I'd encourage your listeners and viewers to go there. You can see the debt exploding in front of your own eyes. And I was going up to Asheville, and I was watching that clock, and I set my cell phone for 1 minute. A minute later, there you go. A minute later, the alarm goes off. The debt had increased by $2 million in 1 minute.
Yeah.
And that's in 1 minute. $2.8 billion a day, 37,000 a second. You see, we are still losing the war, even with Republican Congress, because we haven't reversed that. We've got to reverse that, or we're going to lose our country. You know what's going to happen? Once the dollar implodes, and there's a conglomerate of nations, BRICS, that's Britain, Russia, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and others trying to attack the dollar and replace it. They're not going to replace it with another paper currency. It's not going to be the pound sterling and the Canadian dollar or the franc or the euro dollar or anything. No, they're going to want to replace it with something called central bank digital currency. And if you think the COVID scam was a pre-runner of tyranny, you ain't seen nothing yet. We've got to wake up when we have to attack the problem aggressively from the floor of the Senate and the House, and Congress has to have the guts to do it, or we're going to lose. We're going to lose our constitutional republic, which is exactly what they're pushing for.
Yeah. I know we are in a very difficult, very, very difficult spot right now. And unfortunately, it's as if I don't think that I just don't get the feeling that it's understood even by the people that are sitting in the Oval Office currently. Because when I look at their, the Genius Act and the Clarity Act and the desire to put everybody, with digital currencies such as, oh my God, I just had a complete brain meltdown.
Bitcoin, that's really
Bitcoin. Thank you. I kept thinking bricks. Bitcoin.
Glad to help.
Now, Bitcoin, putting Bitcoin out there as the strategic reserve backed by treasuries, which is, let's be honest, we create treasuries and then we have a fiat currency by the treasuries, and then we have the federal government buy the treasuries back with the fiat currency that they're borrowing. I mean, you can't buy debt with debt. This is total corruption on so many levels, and somehow people believed it for, a period, since Bretton Woods, really. And it's shocking to me now that we don't have, since we took ourselves off the gold standard, something of real value that has been biblical value for 5,000 plus years. And we put ourselves on the oil. And now we're no longer the petrodollar. We're just, what are we? We are zero.
And that's a good point. People understand Nixon made a mistake of taking us off.
Absolutely. Well, that was Kissinger.
I think in 71. Here's what he tried to do to make up for it. He tried to insert this petrodollar arrangement, which forced the dollars all around the world, all oil that's purchased to be exchanged to dollars, which gave us a little bit of gave the dollar some stability. But Saudi Arabia has been trying to do away with that, and they were pushing that very hard. Yeah. And listen, I believe if the Democrats have stolen the election again this time, I think we've lost the dollar already.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we would have. But it's not. You cannot mathematically tax our way out of it. It's absolutely impossible. It can only come by identifying the problem and taking out the deep state and stop this crazy spending that we have. We have to understand that. And you're right. I'm not sure that the advisors in the White House understand it, or maybe they would just want to kick the can down the road. I mean, it's been kicked the can down the road, and this is what I'm saying. We've been dealing. Look, if this guy Whatley that I'm running against, if he were able somehow to get the nomination, which I don't think we're going to take him out. And if he were able to get past Cooper, which he can't, all you have is till it's part two. You have status quo republicanism, and status quo republicanism will lead us right off the cliff. We've got to come to that realization. Yeah, it might slow down. In some ways, it might slow down, the walk to the edge of the plank, but we're still walking to the edge of the plank.
We are. It's as if we are still being sort of hoodwinked with the whole "Make America Great" thing. But we've shelved America first. We're putting on a MAGA, basically a MAGA bag over our heads, and we're being walked right into the New World Order. I feel like we're approaching the Hunger Games, frankly, with the way things are going. But all right, I want to bring it back to something that's near and dear to my heart, something that I learned intimately when I was in North Carolina. We have been very involved. Our foundation, which takes advantage of the 501(c)(3) tax-free donations, and we use all that money not to pay ourselves, but to do the work that we're doing. With respect to Child Protective Services. I'm a big anti-agency government person. I'm a very strong constitutional government person. You know this. You've listened to me speak. I believe we should abolish all of these corrupt agencies, particularly with the ones that are attacking our children, our future of our country. So across the country, we've now, including in your state, DCF, Department of Children and Families, or the Department of Social Services, all under the umbrella of CPS, Child Protective Services, are agencies that are taking children without adequate due process. We are filing a lawsuit right now in Massachusetts. Parents are terrified. What reforms would you champion? Should North Carolina adopt a parent's Bill of Rights with legal teeth, including penalties? Or is our Constitution and your state Constitution, strong enough to include penalties for these wrongful removals? Because if you know anything about Child Protective Services, 95% of the cases don't even meet the legal threshold. which means if you eliminate those 95% of the cases, the amount of money required for the state to even engage in these horrific activities gets reduced by 95%.
It's one of those things, that is sold having some sort of altruistic purpose, but winds up being sinister in its execution. I share the exact same views as you do. I get calls all the time from, and a lot of times it's Christians they're going after, or they're trying to pull kids out of Christian homes and put them in Muslim homes. The sinister political objectives above and beyond just stealing kids from their parents in violation of the United States Constitution has gone off the charts. I think that it's an agency. I think the CPS is an agency, and I would say this across the nation, that probably should be eliminated. And yeah, you got to protect kids somehow, but the government doesn't have the best ability to do that. And we already have criminal statutes on the books to protect kids anyway. So why are you going to need this monolithic agency that is clearly doing more damage than good? And again, in the situation for the national level, we have a $38 trillion national debt. We have the debt, in the state of North Carolina, our Republican General Assembly largely has spending pretty much under control. What's going on in North Carolina is minuscule compared to the national level. But I like to see CPS go. I like to see the Department of Social Services go. I think it's just a bunch of liberal garbage, and I don't see any constitutional role for any of it.
I couldn't agree more. Back when we think about it, when Hurricane Helene, perfect example, FEMA wasn't there first. It was your neighbor.
Right.
And frankly, we've always helped. It's always been neighbor to neighbor, family to family. And when the state intervenes and gets in the middle of it and throws up statutes and red flags, and, it takes your child because you don't want to give it a vitamin K shot, which there's no law, even statutory on the books that talks about something as insane as that, we have a real problem. So how do you hold state agencies accountable when they violate constitutional rights? We've seen Loper Bright overturned. We no longer have to worry about the Chevron doctrine, supposedly, because that was supposedly fixed in the Supreme Court, but we still get this intervention. So, speak to us as an attorney and how do you get judicial reform here?
A couple of things. Well, you could, and I'll talk through them and tell you why it's probably not the best solution. You could have, you could step up criminal prosecutions for a violation of constitutional rights, which is already on the books nationally.
It's not enforced.
That's correct, but it's not enforced. It's not enforced, correct. So even if you did it at the state level, it's not going to be enforced. Good idea, but not enforced. So therefore, it becomes a paper tiger. You could allow, parents, the right to sue, which is there to a degree already, and provide for attorney's fees provisions, but it's very, very, very difficult. Even if I give you the right to sue and I give you some pretty heavy teeth in the penalty phase, punitive damages, right to attorney's fees, or whatever, the lawsuits are still a monstrosity for the average person to deal with. Therefore, it isn't practical. The practical thing is to cut the funding.
Right.
The practical thing is to take, a meat cleaver to these agencies and just get rid of them. That is the quickest, the best, the only way to provide for relief. But it also puts more pressure on the elected representatives. Now, I say pressure. For me, I'm glad to do it, but some don't want to do it. They would rather pass these paper tiger solutions that I suggested earlier, or point to the fact that the federal government could, if it wanted, prosecute for deprivation of a constitutional rights under the color of your office. And by the way, I think, off top a little bit, Fannie Willis, Jack Smith, Letitia James, and Alvin Bragg ought to be prosecuted under that by Pam Bondi already. But you see, that applies to state actors as well. But it isn't happening. So it's a matter of cutting the agency and eliminating it. That is the only and the most effective solution to providing relief.
Well, you went there, so I'm going to go there. You brought up the name Pam Bondi. Thumbs up or thumbs down right now?
Say that again.
Pam Bondi. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Is she doing the job that we wanted, or is she doing the job that you wanted?
I'm disappointed, extremely disappointed. We've seen zero. Look, all right. Look, so we had indictments against Comey and against Letitia James, which were dismissed without prejudice. But we should never be in a position where they were dismissed at all because they didn't get the indictments in within 120 days. And of course, the judge's ruling was suspect there. And you can bring it back against Letitia James. Comey's going to have a statute of defense argument that he will raise. But where are the prosecutions? I'm extremely disappointed that we haven't seen prosecutions. You can't let these clowns get away with what they get. What I'm talking about now, I wrote a book called Kangaroo Court, which I'll send you a copy. You text me your address offline. I'll send you a copy of it. But we look at not just the Trump prosecutions, but a number of other prosecutions the Democrats have brought about, really going back 30 years. For example, they prosecuted Rick Perry when he was governor of Texas for vetoing a bill, which he was able to do under the Texas Constitution. You may remember the governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell. They prosecuted him and his wife for extortion because the governor accepted a gift which he was allowed to do under Virginia law, and he disclosed it. They were convicted. He and his wife were convicted. That was reversed 8-0 by the U.S. Supreme Court after $27 million. But they've gone after average Americans too. You may remember the McCloskeys. Mark and
Yes,
Patricia
I know the
McCloskeys.
McCloskeys. Good people.
Yeah, these are average people. And and that was Kimberly Gardner, by the way, who was a Soros prosecutor.
Yep.
These prosecutors need to be prosecuted. And the theme of my book is it's time to prosecute the prosecutors because they have bastardized our court system. Where's Pam Bondi? I've seen up or down.
So since you served as both a federal prosecutor and a JAG officer, how does this background then prepare you to confront this kangaroo court corruption inside our federal and state agencies? What do we do here? Because from where I'm sitting, we don't have enough leverage inside the House, inside the Senate, to actually affect some impeachment of these people. These people need to be, these federal judicial judges need to be impeached, starting with them. And then we got to get the people in the states to do the same thing. The state legislatures, we've got to clean up our backyard. But like you just said, Soros has done a great job of financing and getting all these people. And we now know through the election theft. I mean, Sydney's work that she's done, the work that Byrne is releasing, and others on this, on what's going on in Venezuela, it's all coming to a head right now. We understand the theft. This is sort of one of those alter and abolish moments that needs to be done in one big sweep, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, as a member of the U.S. Senate, I'm 1 out of 100, but we don't have anybody speaking to this issue. I don't hear one senator saying, "Where are your prosecutions, Pam?" You know, our leadership in Congress has to show some leadership and step up and at least put pressure using some sort of bully pulpit on judges. You mentioned judges. Here's what I want folks to understand: when you go to Article 3 of the Constitution, there are all kinds of these constitutional fictions that we talk about. For example, separation of church and state, not in the Constitution. The notion we're a democracy, no, not in the Constitution. We're only a republic, and the founders hated democracy. I could quote you on that. But another one is this notion that we have co-equal branches of government. Not true at all. When the Constitution was passed in 1787, September 17th, it still had to be ratified. And these anti-federalists, who were some of our greatest patriots, Patrick Henry, didn't want it because they thought it would bring too much centralized power to the government. They were primarily concerned about federal judges. And so Alexander Hamilton writes in Federalist 78, he says, first off, the judiciary will be the weakest by far branch of government because it can't, it doesn't have the power of the purse like the Congress or the power of the sword like the executive. He also pointed out that no federal judge can ever order the president around. And now look what we have. And when you go to the Article 3 of the Constitution, here's what it says. It says the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, but get this, and such other inferior courts. Supreme Court and then inferior courts, and then get this, as Congress, remember that word, as Congress, they from time to time ordain and establish. So you have the Supreme Court, which is below the other branches. Then you have inferior courts at the Court of Appeals level. And inferior to that, you have district court judges. 670 of them. The Democrats think they can order the president to turn around a plane with a bunch of foreign, illegal thugs going back to Central America.
Right.
The Congress has the power to clip their wings. Congress can these courts
defund it, shut it down.
Precisely.
Yeah. And
you can do that more easily than you can actually impeach a judge. Just shut the court. And as far as I'm concerned, when the district attorney for the District of Columbia, United States Attorney, I should say, for DC, and the Justice Department underwent all this J6 charade prosecutions, which was a federation. Those prosecutions were an absolute attack on the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution, the First Amendment. Just cut the money. If you're going to have a cesspool of a federal court system, cut the money to it. Congress has the ability to do that. People don't understand it. It's not like they've got it. They don't have control over these judges. It's just that they don't have the political will to assert the control over these judges. This Boasberg guy, who does he think he is? Or I could cite you a number of them that are just totally out of control. We cut the money for their seats and be done with it.
That's exactly right. Yet they don't seem to have the political will to want to do it, Don. And so,
right.
This goes right into my next question. What would be your top 3 legislative priorities in your first 100 days as U.S. Senator?
Well, the first is to try to get some. I'm going to push this deep state reduction act. Try to attack the national debt. I'm going to beat that drum. Number 1. Number 2, medical freedom. We haven't talked about that, but I've been very involved in the medical freedom movement. Was involved in major litigation concerning the vaccine. Sued Savannah River Nuclear Solutions on behalf of about 78 plaintiffs, mostly nuclear engineers from the Biden administration. They threatened to cut Department of Energy money to that contractor if they didn't force their folks to take the jab. We took that all the way to the Fourth Circuit before Biden backed down. And I'm going to push for vaccination and mass protection at the federal level so that never again can any private employer or governmental entity force you to put anything in your body that you want to put in your body. And It's absolutely ridiculous.
It is.
That includes not just vaccinations, it includes microchips. And the World Economic Forum is already talking about microchip insertion. I'm going to stand for medical freedom. I've been in touch with Simone Gold. We talk from time to time.
Right.
But we're going to battle for that. Nobody else is talking about that. The third is getting these out of control federal judges in control. So I'm going to push for a Judicial Separation of Powers Act to remind these judges of their limitations under Federal 78, that they are the inferior branch. They don't have power over the executive, and specifically to remove any authority that they think they have, which they've done anyway, over immigration and naturalization and over the U.S. military. So you're looking at attacking the debt with a Deep State Reduction Act. You're looking at medical freedom, and you're looking at reining these federal judges in. That's where I would start.
Right.
We go a long ways from there. I can tell you that.
Well, if we can rein these federal judges in, it's going to be huge for freedom fighters around the country, frankly, because we're all hamstrung. Nothing made me happier when I saw President Trump give Boasberg the Heisman and turn that plane and ignore his instructions to turn a plane around full of Tren de Aragua on its way to El Salvador prisons.
If you go back to the Civil War, the classic cases, and Lincoln read the Federalist Papers. So you had a Confederate sympathizer named John Merriman, who was being held at Fort McHenry. You remember Old Satan, you see from the Star Spangled Banner, Fort McHenry. And the Supreme Court had 5 members. The Chief Justice was Roger Taney. They issued a habeas corpus to Lincoln to take the sympathizer out of the the prison and bring him before the Supreme Court. In other words, remove Merriman from Fort McHenry and bring him before the court so we can have a trial. You know what Lincoln did? That order, he just ignored it. Lincoln understood the limitation of the court's power.
Right.
Trump, he did ignore Boasberg's order, and correctly. Boasberg had no authority to give the order to begin with.
Right.
But there have been other cases that he has gone along with it. So if you go back to 2017, and you remember the travel ban in 2017,
right.
Trump issues that travel ban order from about 7 Sharia countries. Democrats sue. They have a judge up in Washington, Judge Robards, and then in Hawaii, Derek Watson, who was Obama's law school classmate, deemed it unconstitutional. The Ninth Circuit says unconstitutional. 1 year and 4 months later, the Supreme Court reverses to Democrat judges and reinstates a travel ban. So Trump went along with them there. It's a political, risk to tell these judges they can go cram it. And I think Trump knows that, I suppose, but he did the right thing in that situation with Boasberg and that order just to ignore it. And he was constitutionally sound to do that.
Great. All right, let's wrap this up here. What separates you from Michael Whatley in terms of governing philosophy, accountability, courage? And why is this race more than about just a primary? Why is it really more about the soul and direction of the Republican Party?
Well, I'll go back and quote President Trump himself in 2016 when he said, drain the swamp. And you and I know it needs to be drained. And here's what President Trump says specifically. We need to get lobbyists out of government.
Bingo.
Michael Whatley has been a lobbyist. Okay.
Yep.
I'm a military officer. You want a lobbyist or a military officer? You want a lobbyist or a constitutional lawyer? You want a lobbyist or somebody who's fought for medical freedom and fought for the freedom of our military service members who are prosecuted under the Obama rules of engagement and fought against, election fraud. You want a fighter or a Washington insider? And really, that's what it boils down to. I'm America first. That means putting the United States Constitution first. That means limited government. That means understanding the Article 1, Section 8, the limited powers. Everything else goes back to the states. If you cannot justify an agency, it goes. The IRS has got to go. The Department of Education's got to go. FEMA, you can throw it on the trash can and burn it up.
Yeah,
this gets in the way. And I am going to wage a war against the deep state. Whatley will, if he were able to get into the Senate, he'll hold his head down and he will obey the ghost of Mitch McConnell and do whatever John Thune tells him to do. I'm probably going to be the least popular member of the Republican caucus on the Senate, but I'm going to put America first and put my state first, and the rest can kind of fall into place because I got nothing to lose.
Now you're going to have the popularity of the American people behind you from where I'm sitting, and I think anybody watching this is going to completely agree. So let's put it this way. If you win this primary, what's your message to Roy Cooper, who polls show you beating by double digits at this point?
Say, get ready. I'm going to chase you all over the state and remind you of what you did to the state during COVID. For me, and I shared this story, I'll share with you. With Roy Cooper, for me, it's personal. Because the last time I saw my daddy alive, my sister Amy and I were standing outside of a nursing home in Plymouth, North Carolina, on a patch of frozen grass from the outside, looking inside, waving at our daddy, who was just a few weeks away from leaving this earth. Roy Cooper, with his unconstitutional mandates, separated dying North Carolinians in nursing homes from their families. He shut the state down. He did irreparable damage. He has been the most radical left-wing governor in the state's history. And if you remember that the horrific stabbing of this poor girl, Arena, on the Charlotte light rail, well, Roy Cooper commuted the sentences of 15 animals, just like that animal that killed Arena, on the day that he left office. These are animals who murdered North Carolinians. I'm going to remind him of that every day of the campaign trail. He is a target-rich political environment. We're going to take him down. As I say, we're going to take down Governor Lockdown.
I love it. Where can North Carolinians volunteer, donate, and join your grassroots movement?
Well, yes, ma'am. Our website is brown4nc, brown4nc.com. And you can go in there and contact us. You can send us $25, $50, up to $3,500 if you wanted to. But we're grateful for anything and everything we can get. We are fighting a machine. We're fighting a fundraising establishment machine that wants to preserve the status quo. And we cannot survive much longer on the status quo. We've got to make a change, and we don't have a lot of time in. So please go to brown4nc.com. Help us any way you can. We need your money, but we also need, this is going to be a grassroots effort in the primary like the state has never seen. And a lot of people are going to be surprised, some pleasantly so.
I love it. So what's your final message then to the voters who feel ignored by the political establishment?
Well, you are ignored by the establishment. I'm ignored by the establishment. I mean, they're obviously, they're more concerned about preserving the Washingtonian cesspool than about whether we keep our jobs in North Carolina. They could care less about the cost of living. Yes, we've gotten gasoline down, but food prices are too high. We do that by attacking regulation. And the establishment on both sides are ignoring us. I will not ignore. I'm standing with our shrimpers in the eastern part of the state. They try to shut our shrimping businesses down. I'm standing with our mountain counties and our eastern counties that have been neglected by the federal and state government through these hurricane disasters. And we're going to bring this government back to the people. The three most important words of the United States Constitution are in the preamble: we the people. And that's what this campaign is about. It's about putting North Carolinians first and putting Americans first, not the deep state swamp in Washington, D.C. or in Raleigh.
This is such fantastic news. I love the energy you brought to this interview, Don. I can't thank you enough for joining me today. In America, this is the Senate race. That's a preview of 2026, frankly, from where I'm sitting. The people are rising, the establishment's panicking, and today we heard exactly why. Don Brown, thank you for joining us on Steel News today.
Thank you, Ann. Hope to see you again real soon. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. I appreciate you tuning into this very important segment. This has been Don Brown from North Carolina, U.S. Senate candidate. Don, one more time, your website. Where can folks find you? Brown, the word for, brown4nc.com. That's brown4, FORNC.com. All right. And now a word from our sponsor. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi, I'm Ann Vandersteel. I want to talk to you a little bit about your health. Part of my daily routine is to get up in the morning and get a little exercise on. If I have time for a mile or 7, doesn't matter. I get out the door every single day. It's important to get my body moving and get that oxygen flowing through my brains. What is also equally important is what I put in my body after I exercise. I rely on vandersteelhealth.com, where I have a delicious selection of superfoods and other supplements. But first and foremost for me are my superfoods. I have a delicious shake every single day. It is organic, all made in the United States of America, non-GMO, never processed before, dehydrated superfoods. And when they reconstitute with water, milk, or whatever juice you like, it makes a delicious, healthy, plant-based protein supplement. And I say supplement because, frankly, I use this as a meal replacement. This is what's helped me lose the last 20 pounds of COVID. I'm back down to my fighting college weight, fitting in my college clothes, and feeling better than ever. So go to vandersteelhealth.com and get your delicious superfoods. Get on the transformation program with us. It's a 30-day kickoff, and it will get your day starting out great. And watch the weight just fall off. Watch the energy increase, the brain fog lift, and of course the ancillary benefits in your hair, skin, and nails. All these things, you are what you eat. Remember that. Go to vandersteelhealth.com.